Chapter 666. In June of the first year of Jinghe, from the moment he saw Mississippi Lu on the horse for the first time, he had lost countless confrontations with Mississippi Lu. It was the first time that Li Yi was in an absolute advantage. Finally, he could hold his head high and sing like a surf. Even his mood inexplicably became better. He picked up the 2 account books and casually flipped through them. He usually asked others to check the accounts. He had never experienced the feeling of being an accountant. He shook his head and turned into the room. In the room, Mississippi Lu sat on the bed and looked at him coldly with eyes as sharp as swords. Anyway, she couldn't beat him now. Maybe when she recovered, she wouldn't be able to beat him anymore. Thinking about it, he was a little expectant. Sitting at the table, he opened the 2 account books and read them carefully. Achoo! Somewhere in the Lin mansion, a short-bearded man wrapped in a quilt sat on the bed and sneezed fiercely. Yesterday, his clothes caught fire and he jumped into the pond in the mansion in a hurry. Although he wasn't burned, he felt dizzy the next morning. The doctor said that he had caught a cold and had to stay at home to recuperate these days. This caused his dissatisfaction towards the new accountant in the manor to almost reach its peak. A young man stood in front of the bed and said with a frown, "Father, big sister is too much. She simply treats the Lin family as her own. This can't go on. I only asked her for 100 taels of silver today, but she didn't give it to me. She even asked me where I spent the 200 taels of silver last time." The short-bearded man waved his hand and said, "I know. Go and call your 3rd uncle and 4th uncle." "Okay, I'll go right away." The young man answered, stood up and walked out of the door. "Wait a minute." The short-bearded man stopped him and asked, "Where did you spend the 200 taels of silver last time?" The young man was stunned and said, "I donated it to Miss Xiangxiang in the top courtesan competition of Spring Fragrance House." "You are generous to throw 200 taels of silver to a prostitute like this." The middle-aged man waved his hand and said, "Go. When you come back, go to the ancestral hall and kneel for 4 hours. The young man who was about to step out stopped. Li Yi gave a long stretch, and a crackling sound came from his body. After more than a month of bumping, he didn't eat or sleep well. He finally slept on the bed for a day, but now he had to sleep on the ground again. It was better to move out as soon as possible. This morning, he was going to take a look at the Lin family's shop. He had made an appointment with the man named Lin Yong yesterday. On the way, he was going to tidy up the yard there. If he was fast, he could move in tonight. "Li brothers, have you woken up? We're about to go." Just as he finished washing up and walked into the courtyard, the big man was already shouting outside the door. "I'm coming." Li stood in the courtyard and replied to him. He then returned to his room to inform Miss Lu before opening the door and walking out. The burly man called Lin Yong walked over and urged, "Hurry up. Young Miss should have already gone out by now." Li Yi waved his hand. "Let's go." The Lin family owned a few jewelry shops in Feng Prefecture. Although they were not considered as wealthy merchants, they were still quite well off. The shop they were going to was located in the most prosperous area in the center of the city. The name of the shop was pretty good. Fragrant Forest Park. The name of this jewelry shop was very unique. When a scholar was tired of studying and wanted to relax, he would walk on the street and look up, and coincidentally see such an attractive brothel. Therefore, he happily entered the shop, but because he touched a female employee's hand, he was surrounded by people. He couldn't escape the crime of taking liberties with a woman. Helpless, he could only spend 100 taels of silver in the shop to settle the matter. Otherwise, he would be reported to the authorities. Unfortunately, there were only male employees in the shop. It was obvious that Miss Lin had not thought of such a good way to make money. "These are all valuable things. You guys move slowly. Put this down, I'll do it." The man in front directed the workers to unload the goods from the carriage. Among them, there were many goods that were transported from the Jing Kingdom. Although the Jing Kingdom lagged behind the Qi Kingdom in many aspects in terms of economy and military, it was far ahead in terms of fashion. It was the target of pursuit by all the neighboring countries, including the Qi Kingdom. Ruidu, perfume, soap, and women's bras were popular in the Jing Kingdom. They were also very popular in the Qi Kingdom. Many merchants had shipped these goods from the Jing Kingdom to the Qi Kingdom and made a fortune. If the old emperor saw this scene, he would be very pleased. In some aspects, the Jing kingdom had subtly influenced many neighboring countries. Put this in the most conspicuous place. Be careful. This horse is worth 8,000 taels of silver. If it's damaged, you won't be able to pay for it even if you sell yourself. Li Yi saw the man take out an item from the box and put it in a place where he could see it as soon as he stepped into the shop. He couldn't help but be stunned. After a while, he slowly walked over and asked the woman, "Miss Lin, did you also buy this horse from the Jing kingdom?" Lin Wanru glanced at her and said lightly, "This is called Flying Swallow Horse." Of course, Li Yi knew this horse was called Flying Swallow Horse. The 4 words on the pedestal were made by him. This Miss Lin treated him and Mississippi Lu well. Li Yi really felt bad for letting her spend 8,000 taels of silver to buy such a thing. Her situation in the Lin mansion was not very good. If she really sold Liolia's glass, wouldn't she be blamed by those people? As a person who knew how to repay kindness, he would remind her to change hands as soon as possible if there was a chance in the future. Otherwise, he would feel even worse. However, this Miss Lin didn't seem to be in a good mood now. There was still a long way to go. It wouldn't hurt to tell her in a few days. That girl is still injured. Hearing her sudden words, Li Yi turned his head in confusion. He didn't know why she suddenly said this. Lin Wanru glanced at him. Her expression was slightly abnormal. She said, "During this period, you'd better control yourself." Control? Control what? Li Yi asked doubtfully. This time Lin Wanru didn't answer. She directly turned her head and left. Inexplicable. Watching her leave in a hurry, Li Yi shook his head. He walked over and asked the man, "Brother Lin, where is the nearest pawn shop?" Pawn shop. A trace of doubt appeared on the man's face. He asked, "Why do you ask about the pawn shop? If you don't have money, just tell me. You can take some from me first." Li Yi shook his head and said, "I happen to have some useless things on me. I want to pawn them." "Okay." The burly man nodded, pointed in a certain direction and said, "The pawn shop is quite far from here. Walk forward from here. Do you see that cloud? Walk to the bottom of that cloud. Turn right into a street, and then turn left. You still have to walk for about 2 more streets, and then, the man scratched his head and said, "I only remember this much. When you get there, you can find someone to ask." Li Yi was proud of his sense of direction to be able to find this pawn shop with such an unreliable way. He looked at the 2 big words pawn shop erected at the door of the shop and walked in. Chapter 667. Inside a pawn shop in Feng State City. The pawn shop's manager was a middle-aged man with a big belly. He wore a robe embroidered with copper coins. His eyes were so small that they were almost invisible when he squinted. He was holding a jade pendant in his hand and carefully examining it. After a while, he put down the jade pendant and looked at the man wearing a bamboo hat in front of him, saying, "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't accept this jade pendant." "Why?" The man wearing a bamboo hat had an ethereal voice, and his age was indiscernible. The shopkeeper changed the topic and asked, "May I ask, sir, where did you get this jade pendant from?" "I picked it up," the man replied lightly. As a pawnshop manager, he had heard this kind of excuse many times in his life. He smiled and said, "Without the permission of the emperor, even a prince can't wear such a jade pendant. Either the person who made this jade pendant is extremely daring, or the person who stole it has eaten a bear's heart and a leopard's gall. Our shop is small, so we don't dare to accept this kind of thing. If that's the case, then I'll take my leave." The man wearing a bamboo hat put away the jade pendant and turned to leave without hesitation. He didn't expect that the other party would be so straightforward. The fat manager's expression changed and he immediately said, "Wait. 1,000 taels of silver." He looked at the man's back and said, 1,000 taels of silver. Leave this jade pendant here. I can't go any higher. Let me tell you the truth. No one in Feng State City would dare to accept this jade pendant except for me. The quality of this jade pendant was the best. It was shaped like a 5-clawed golden dragon that only emperors could have. Of course, this didn't mean that this kind of jade pendant only appeared in the royal family. Some officials who had great merits or were extremely favored would often be rewarded by the emperor. They would be able to own some royal items, but these things were treated as family heirlooms and rarely leaked out. Because of this, the value of these items was extremely high. Although they couldn't be sold openly, there was actually a market for them secretly. The manager walked to the door and closed it. He then slowly said, "How about it? Do you want to consider it?" After a quarter of an hour, a man wearing a bamboo hat came out of a pawnshop in Feng State City with a bag in his hand. 1,000 taels of silver sounded like a lot, but it wasn't heavy at all. In the future, it would only be about 60 pounds. Buying medicinal herbs and other things required a lot of silver. The most valuable things they had were Mississippi Lou's autumn water and the jade pendant hanging on it. Mississippi Lou wouldn't sell the jade pendant even if she was beaten to death. He forgot when she had asked for that jade pendant from him. A dragon-shaped jade pendant was rarely seen. It was probably given by the old emperor. He didn't expect that it would come. As for the bamboo hat on his head, he had just bought it on the street. He had even borrowed a few taels of silver from the burly man surnamed Lin. Although no one here knew him, it was better to be vigilant just to be on the safe side. After all, he had a bamboo hat and a middle-aged man, Bai and Li and He Ling. On his way here, he passed by a medicine shop and wanted to buy some useful medicinal ingredients. Li took a few steps and suddenly stopped. He turned his head to look and saw two shadows flashing into the alley. Li didn't stop and continued forward. "Big brother, that man just came out of the pawn shop. His bag was bulging. He must have pawned something good. He's alone. Let's follow him. We might be able to kill a fat sheep this time. Contact third brother. We have a job." Whispers could be heard coming from a small alley somewhere. After an hour, Li came out of a pharmacy. He looked back and shook his head. How was this buying medicine? This was robbery. 1,000 taels of silver was gone in an instant. All he got was a small bag of medicinal herbs. It seemed that the difficulty of seeing a doctor and buying medicine had been like this since ancient times. He stood at the entrance of the pharmacy and looked in a certain direction. After walking for a short distance, he turned and walked into another alley. Chance. In the crowd, several people's faces lit up, and they quickly walked towards the small alley. Where is he? After a while, they looked at the dead end in front of them. They looked like they had seen a ghost. They clearly saw the man wearing the bamboo hat walk in here. How did he suddenly disappear? Could it be that he flew into the sky? Just as this thought appeared, a black shadow suddenly appeared in front of them. Li jumped down from the wall and knocked out 3 people. He stood at the entrance of the alley and asked the last person, "Who sent you? Where is the Empress?" What Empress?" The last man's face was pale and cold sweat dripped from his forehead. "It's good that you don't know her." Li walked over and knocked him out. He walked out of the alley. Halfway out, he turned back. He searched the waists of the 4 people and took out a few money bags. This was a critical time. It was time to pick up his old profession. His family is quite well off. He collected the dozens of taels of silver and walked out of the alley. At the same time, 2 streets away, another young man stepped into Fragrant Forest Park. "Greetings, young Master Bai." Inside the shop, several workers immediately bowed and greeted him. In a corner of the shop, the man surnamed Lin curled his lips and said, "That Bai guy, why is he here again?" The young man smiled and asked, "Is Wanru in the shop?" A worker immediately said, "Miss is in the back." The young man nodded. Just as he was about to go over, his expression suddenly froze. He looked in a certain direction in the shop. "This is horse stepping on swallow-colored glaze?" The young man's face revealed a surprised expression. When he was about to reach out to touch it, someone grabbed his wrist from the side. "Don't touch it. It's very valuable." The man named Lin Yong said expressionlessly. The young man showed an apologetic expression and said, "Sorry, it's the first time I've seen such a perfect colored glaze. I couldn't help myself." His eyes stayed on the colored glaze for a while. Seeing a figure walk out from the back, he hurriedly walked over and said with concern, "Wanru, I heard that you encountered bandits on your way back. How are you? Are you hurt?" A guilty expression appeared on the young man's face. "If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have let you go. It's all my fault. Lin Wanru took a step back and said, "Thank you for your concern, Brother Bai. I'm fine." "As long as you're fine." The young man nodded, then a smile appeared on his face as he said, "Yesterday, I happened to get a piece of Zhao Xiuwen's calligraphy. I don't know much about poetry, but I know Wanru likes it, so I specially brought it over today as an apology." He waved his hand. Immediately, someone behind him took out a scroll of painting and unfolded it on the table beside him. Light perspiration slightly penetrates the jade, bathing fragrant orchids during the Ming Dynasty's Dragon Boat Festival. Fragrance blossoms fill the clear river. Colorful threads lightly wrap around red jade arms. Small talismans hang diagonally from green clouds. Beautiful people meet for 1,000 years. The handwriting on it was elegant, like moving clouds and flowing water. It was an excellent piece of semi-cursive writing. Zhao Xiuwen was the #1 poet in the Qi Kingdom. Although he was young, he was very talented in poetry. Even those who did not know poetry would have heard of his reputation. The young man explained, "This poem is called Huanqisha Duanwu." It is said that when Zhao Xiuwen was competing with the #1 scholar in the Jing Kingdom, the scholar wrote it. After Zhao Xiuwen returned to the Jing Kingdom, he admired the scholar very much. He even imitated the scholar's handwriting many times. This is one of his imitations. Therefore, the style of his handwriting is different from his usual style. Lin Wanru looked at the words. A strange look appeared in her eyes, but she quickly hid it. She shook her head and said, "This is too valuable. I can't accept it." Zhao Xiuwen was very famous in the Qi Kingdom. Not only was he famous for his poetry, but his calligraphy had also reached the peak. However, Zhao Xiuwen treasured his calligraphy very much. Other than a few pieces, he rarely let them out. Because of this, his calligraphy had always been very valuable. It was said that each word was worth 1,000 taels of gold. The young man smiled and said, "Wanru, you don't have to decline. If this is left with me, it would be the real Emingzu casting herself in the dark." The man named Lin Yong stood at the side. He touched his chin and said, "I don't think there's anything good about this. It can't be fake, right?" A servant behind the young man said angrily, "You fool, do you think you can understand Lord Zhao's words?" "I don't understand. Do you?" The big man glanced at him and casually pulled over a young man who had just walked into the shop. He asked, "Li brothers, they said this was written by Zhao Xiuwen. You are a scholar. Come and take a look. Is this calligraphy good?" Li put down the bag and glanced at it. He said, "It's fake." Chapter 668. How could he not know whether this Huanqisha Duanwu painting before him was the work of Zhao Xiuwen? Back then, that shameless fellow had begged him to give him the original manuscript of this famous poem. He had even brought up the international relations between the Qi Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom. Later, he had even personally sent a work that he was proud of to his home. It was impossible for him not to accept it. If he had known that this fellow's calligraphy and paintings were worth so much money in the Qi Kingdom, he would not have pawned the jade pendant that the old emperor had given him. Of course, shamelessness was one thing. When it came to poetry and composition, Li Yi had to admit that this fellow was indeed a genius. He could barely produce good calligraphy. There was no need for him to copy Wang Shiji's semi-cursive script into such a cowardly appearance. If anyone dared to say that this piece of calligraphy was written by Zhao Xiuwen himself would probably want to beat that person up. The man curled his lips and said, Look. Even the Li brothers are saying that your calligraphy is fake. Hurry up and take it back." Before the young man could speak, the servant beside him immediately jumped out and said loudly, "Who are you? If you say it's fake, then it's fake. My young master spent 2,000 taels of silver to buy it. If you don't know anything, then don't speak carelessly." "Brother, are you saying that this piece of calligraphy is fake?" The young man did not get angry. Instead, he revealed a smile and looked at him as he asked. Li shook his head and said, "The calligraphy can't be said to be fake. However, if you insist that it was written by Zhao Xiuwen, then it's a little fake." The young man asked again, "Brother, do you have proof?" Lin Wanru, who was at the side, tilted her head to look at him, and shook her head slightly. Although Zhao Xiuwen was famous in the Qi kingdom, it did not affect the Jing kingdom. He might not even know who Zhao Xiuwen was, so how could he know Zhao Xiuwen's calligraphy? Even she, who was extremely familiar with Zhao Xiuwen's handwriting, could not tell that this piece of calligraphy was fake. How could this poor scholar who was picked up on the road be able to tell? If he spoke so casually, he would be put on the spot later. Evidence? Li Yi casually took a pen from the counter and scribbled on another piece of paper before saying, "Coincidentally, I am just like Zhao Xiuwen. I admire the #1 scholar in the Jing kingdom who is handsome, elegant, literary, and peerless in martial arts. I like to copy his handwriting. Sire, surely you don't think that the famous Zhao Xiuwen of the Qi kingdom is inferior to a nobody like me?" Li Yi put down the pen and the piece of paper. When Lin Wanru and the young man looked over, they couldn't help but be stunned. There was only one sentence on that piece of paper. It was the last sentence of the Huanxisha, Duanwu. Beauty meets for 1,000 years. If there was no comparison, there would be no harm. Although Lin Wanru could not be considered a talented girl, she had received the education of a noble lady in the Lin family since she was young, so she still had the basic ability to distinguish between good and bad. This sentence, "Beauty meets for 1,000 years," was indeed much more pleasing to the eye. Just now, she had thought that the painting that Bai Yu had sent over was Zhao Xiuwen's authentic work. Now, it seemed that this scholar's writing was even more authentic than Zhao Xiuwen's. Zhao Xiuwen was a role model for the scholars of the Qi kingdom. Naturally, he would not be defeated so easily by a scholar he had picked up from the streets. The only explanation was that this was not Zhao Xiuwen's authentic work. The youth surnamed Bai's face alternated between green and red. After a while he sighed and cupped his hands towards Li Yi, saying, "It was this Bai's poor eyesight that allowed me to be deceived by others. Thank you for the reminder, brother. I am Bai Yu, may I know your name?" Li Yi cupped his hands and said, "Brother Bai is too polite. Just call me Li Xian." "Wanru, I am truly sorry. It was all my negligence." The young man nodded at him. Then he looked at Lin Wanru and said apologetically, "I still have some matters to attend to. I will take my leave first." The young man came quickly and left just as quickly. Of course, before he left, he took the authentic work of Zhao Xiuwen with him. It was no wonder that this Miss Lin was not interested in him at all. He did not care at all when it came to picking up girls. He either did not give her a gift or gave her a fake one. Most importantly, he was exposed in front of her. For someone like this to be able to pick up girls, he must be very rich. The man asked with a gossipy expression, "Li brothers, you said earlier that the #1 scholar of the Jing kingdom was handsome, elegant, literary, and unparalleled in martial arts. Is that true or false? Isn't he a scholar? How could he be unparalleled in martial arts?" Li Yi looked at him and said, "Do you know that he is well versed in both literature and martial arts? In the Jing kingdom, the name deadly scholar can stop children from crying at night. Which martial artist in the martial arts world would not tremble upon hearing it?" Lin Wanru thought for a while and suddenly said, "I have heard that Li Yi is no more than 4 feet and 5 inches tall. He is short and has the head of a rat and the eyes of a deer." What? Li Yi could not help but widen his eyes when he heard this. 1 foot and 33 centimeters, 4 feet and 5 inches. In total, he was not even 1.5 meters tall. Was he that short? And the remaining 1 foot was eaten by the people of the Qi kingdom? Short and 5 inches tall? Rat in the eyes of a deer. Just go to the capital and ask around. Who would not give a thumbs up when the name of County Uncle Li was mentioned? Who did not know that County Uncle Li was handsome and elegant? He was the object of love for countless girls in the capital, regardless of gender and age. Slander. This was a shameful slander. He said with some embarrassment and anger, "Who said this?" "That is what people say." Lin Wanru put away the piece of paper and said, "However, you are from the Jing kingdom, so you should have seen the #1 scholar. It seems that the rumors are wrong." Li Yi agreed with her words and said, "Wrong? It is not just wrong, it is a big mistake." The man nodded and said, "I think so too. No matter what, he is the #1 scholar. He must be much better than Bai Yu, that pretty boy." "You are right. County Uncle Li is naturally not comparable to those pretty boys. Li nodded and said. The man looked at him with a strange look and said, Aren't you scholars all pretty boys? Young master, that guy dared to deceive us with a fake. Report him to the authorities immediately. On the street, a servant behind the young man said angrily while gritting his teeth. You don't have to worry about this. The young man stopped in his tracks and turned around to say, Find out the background of that Li Xian and his relationship with Wanru. Yes, young master. The servant was stunned for a moment and immediately replied. At the same time, in an alley somewhere in the city, a figure slowly climbed up with the help of the wall. He rubbed his slightly aching head and shook the 3 people lying around him to wake them up. What happened just now? I think I was knocked out. Where is that fat sheep? Fat sheep my ass. The leader of the group knocked his head. He thought it was a fat sheep, but he did not expect to be blocked by a tiger. Not only did he get beaten up, but he also lost his wallet. Next time, keep your eyes open. If you see someone wearing a bamboo hat, take a detour. The leader rubbed his head and said bitterly, Let's go. Not long after, several people walked out of the alley. As they walked on the street, they began to look for their next target. The big man saw a scholar coming out of a brothel. Before he could walk over, he was suddenly pulled by the arm and pulled to a corner. What are you doing? His expression changed. He thought that he was about to be discovered. When he turned around and saw a thin man, his expression relaxed, and he said in an unfriendly tone. The thin man looked at him and said mysteriously, May I ask if you have heard of the Empress? The Empress? The man was stunned for a moment. He pondered these words and finally thought of something. His eyes became fierce. You are together? What? Together? The thin man's face was just filled with doubt when his abdomen was kicked and he was sent flying. It's the Empress again. You guys are in cahoots, right? The Empress of Heaven, right? I'll let you be the Empress. The big man rushed over in 2 steps and punched and kicked the thin man. After a long time, he stopped with satisfaction and spat on the ground. Scram. If you dare mention the Empress in front of me again, I'll beat you up every time I see you. Chapter 669. Li brothers, the courtyard has been tidied up. You and that lady will live here from now on. Lin Yong walked out of a small courtyard next to Fonglin Park and said, This place is close to the shop, so we can take care of each other. The courtyard had been tidied up by a few shop assistants. It was said that it was where Miss Lin stayed for a short period of time. It was not big, but the location was very good. It was almost in the prime area of the city. Li Yi went in with the man's lead. Next to the main room, there was a small kitchen. It looked like it had never been used. It could be used with some pots and pans, which was exactly what he wanted. Apart from the small kitchen, there was only one room. This place is not big. Miss used to rest occasionally at noon. You two can make do with it. The big man looked around and said, See if you still lack anything and tell me. Tomorrow, Miss will have someone send it over from the mansion. Li shook his head and said, Thank Miss Lin for me, but there is no need. We can slowly add the rest in the future. After the man left, Li first bought 2 bolts of cloth from the cloth shop outside, and hung them in the room, dividing the bedroom from the middle. There were no extra rooms here, so he could only make do like this. The kitchen utensils were also bought, and he even had time to buy rice and vegetables. Before the sun set, he had almost bought everything he needed. If there was anything missing, he could wait until tomorrow. After that, he locked the door. Fonglin Park happened to be closed, so he returned to the Lin family with the man. He refused the man's offer to send them in a carriage, and helped Mississippi Lu out of the courtyard. He had been away from home for more than a month. He didn't know how Rui and the others were doing. The news from Shuzhou would probably take a few days to get back. They probably didn't expect that he had come to the Qi Kingdom. He had to find a way to get the news out as soon as possible. He didn't have to worry about the situation in the capital. Even if the academy had its own operating system, with Li Xian watching over it and Li Han around, there wouldn't be any problems. It was unlikely that anything big would happen to his family, and it was unlikely that the old emperor's health would deteriorate to that extent in just 3 to 5 months. Yongning and Shanning would probably stay in the palace for a long time. He didn't know if the eldest princess would still practice her sword in the morning dew hall every day. What was the situation in the small courtyard in Willow Lane? Li Yi didn't know any of this. When he walked out of the Lin mansion, he turned his head and saw that Miss Lu was frowning. Li Yi thought for a while, squatted down and said, "Come on up." Mississippi Lu shook her head and said, "It's okay. I can walk." Li Yi urged, "You don't have a problem, but I do. It's getting dark. If we continue walking like this, we won't make it before the curfew. Hurry up, don't dawdle." Mississippi Lu glanced at him, gritted her teeth and said, "When my injuries are healed." Li Yi lifted his head and looked at her. "What do you want to do after you've recovered?" "Hurry up, don't dawdle. I'll thank you properly when I recover." Mississippi Lu laid on Li Yi's back and slowly closed her eyes. She emphasized on the word thank you. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "You're welcome. We're family. It's what I should do." It took about half an hour to walk from the Lin family to the shop. The night was about to fall. There were not many pedestrians on the streets of Feng State City. Under the light of the setting sun, a long shadow spread out behind him. Li Yi suddenly sighed and said, "Don't be so silly in the future." This time Mississippi Lu did not respond. Thinking of something, Li Yi tilted his head and asked, "Actually, there's something that I've always been curious about." "What is it?" Mississippi Lu asked lightly. "How did you fall in love with me?" Li Yi looked at her profile and asked, "The first time we met, you were riding on a horse." Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and said, "Uncle Fong said that the scholar looked easy to bully, so I chose him." Li Yi curled his lips and said, "Admit it. You were subdued by my temperament. At that time, your hair was messy, your clothes were untidy, your head was full of sweat, and you even lost one of your shoes. Is this your temperament?" Mississippi Lu suddenly asked curiously, "By the way, why did you run that day?" There was no way to continue this conversation. Li Yi turned his head and quickened his pace. He said, "I like to run. It's none of your business." Feng Province was an important city of the Qi Kingdom. It was the political and military center of the surrounding prefectures. The curfew system was very strict. The city gates were closed at the hour of the sea. Even the red light streets and alleys were not allowed to walk on the streets at this time. Those who violated the rules would be punished, and those who violated the rules would be sentenced to death. After the second watch, there was no one except for the night watchmen and patrolling soldiers. At this time, it was close to the hour of the sea. There were not many people on the streets. A group of riders quickly entered the city and galloped through the streets. Soon they arrived in front of a luxurious mansion. The figure at the very front dismounted his horse and asked, "Has His Highness rested?" A servant at the entrance of the mansion immediately said, "It's not the hour of the sea yet. His Highness is dealing with official business. Please wait for a moment, General. I'll go inform him immediately." Not long after, in a study in the mansion, Shen Han greets His Highness. The man knelt on the ground and greeted the young man behind the table respectfully. "General Shen, you don't have to be so courteous." The young man quickly walked out from behind the table and helped him up. "General Shen, please sit." He pointed to a chair at the side and then asked in confusion, "General, you're not in Chong Province. Why did you come here in the middle of the night? Is there something important?" Chong Province was at the border of the Qi Kingdom. It was separated from the Jing Kingdom's Shu Province by a river. Shen Han was one of the generals guarding the city, and would not leave the city easily. "Your Highness, I do have something important to report." Shen Han cupped his hands and said, "Over a month ago, Li Yi was taken away from the capital of the Jing Kingdom. A few days ago, he appeared in Shu Province and then disappeared without a trace. The officials of Shu Province almost turned the entire Shu Province upside down, but they could not find him. I'm guessing that he has come to our Qi Kingdom." The young man looked stunned and asked in disbelief, "Who did you say? Li Yi has come to the Qi Kingdom?" "Yes." Shen Han's expression was solemn as he said, "This news has almost spread throughout the Jing Kingdom and reached Shu Province a few days ago. I only learned about it a day ago, so I rushed over to inform your Highness." Shenhan had been to the capital with His Highness before, so he naturally knew how important Li Yi was to His Highness. He said, "He has a grudge against the king of Shu. If he falls into the king's hands, he will not have a good ending. Moreover, he has not appeared in Shu province since then. I'm guessing that he has come to the Qi kingdom." "That's great." The young man's face lit up with joy. He said, "Pass down the order immediately. Ask the surrounding counties to pay more attention. Once they find any traces of him, they must invite him to Feng province. In addition, send people to closely monitor the movements in Shu province. If he is discovered by the king of Shu in Shu province, immediately send envoys to negotiate." "I understand." The man named Shenhan bowed and said. The young man walked to the window and looked out. A smile appeared on his face as he murmured, "Brotherly, oh brotherly, we haven't seen each other for a long time." By the river in Shu province, an old man with unkempt hair stared at the surging river. A trace of doubt appeared on his face. Could it be that he has really gone to the Qi kingdom? Chapter 670. From today onwards, Li Yi planned to raise Mississippi Lu like a pig for a long time. The contents of this bowl of medicinal cuisine were very rich. Ordinary people might not be able to withstand the effects of the medicine, but with Mississippi Lu's physique, there was no need to worry about the problem of not being able to withstand it. With all kinds of tonics, the sooner her body recovered, the sooner she could go back. He served a bowl of porridge to Mississippi Lu and himself and sat in the yard. The man named Lin Yong walked in from outside. He was stunned for a moment and said, "Li brothers, have you eaten?" Li nodded and looked at him. "Brother Lin, do you want a bowl?" The big man waved his hand with a smile and said, "No need, no need. I've already eaten on the way here." Li looked at him and asked, "Really?" "Delicious, it's really delicious." Lin Yong put down the bowl, wiped his mouth and praised, "I didn't expect Li brothers to know how to cook, and your cooking skills are so good. If your sister-in-law had half of your cooking skills, I would wake up laughing in my dreams." Seeing him licking his lips, Li Yi asked, "Do you want another bowl?" "Enough, enough." Lin Yong smiled and waved his hand. "I can't eat any more." When he ate the second bowl, Lin Yong's hands finally slowed down. While eating, he said, "I've seen those scholars often say that the kitchen is far from the kitchen. Li brothers, you are different from them. Miss Lu followed you because of her good fortune in her previous life. She didn't choose the wrong person." Li looked back. Fortunately, Mississippi Lu's body hadn't recovered yet. Otherwise, this brother Lin would definitely come in vertically and leave horizontally. Recently, he often saw Lin Yong these days. The things in the jewelry store were very valuable. Losing any one of them would be a big loss. Not to mention, if they were to encounter a group of bold people who would openly rob them, the loss of a single store would mean that everyone in the Lin family would have to starve for a whole year. Therefore, the Lin family arranged a lot of guards in every store. The Fonglin court next to it was under Lin Yong's responsibility. Those fellows at home don't have any other skills, but they know how to stab their own people in the back. These few days, they said that young Miss spent 8,000 taels of silver to buy a decoration, and they said that they hired an outsider to be their accountant. Lin Yong said, "If Li brothers hear any rumors, don't mind them. They are just idle all day." Li Yi couldn't be bothered with the matters of the Lin family. Naturally, he wouldn't care about it. That Miss Lin obviously had some tricks up her sleeve. It shouldn't be a problem for her to deal with those people. In the past few days, he accompanied Mississippi Lu to chat, sleep, and when he was really bored, he did some accounting. He was idle, but he spent his money quickly. In a few days, he spent another 200 taels of silver. Buying medicine really burned money. He had free time, but he didn't stop practicing. His inner strength had almost caught up, but his experience and moves were still very lacking. Mississippi Lu was injured, but it didn't stop her from sitting at the side and giving pointers. When he turned around, he saw Lin Wanru standing at the door in a daze. A trace of surprise appeared on Li Yi's face. He said, "Miss Lin, what's the matter?" Lin Wanru came back to her senses and shook her head. She said, "It's nothing. I'll leave first." It was just that every time she was upset, she would come here out of habit. This time, She forgot that she had arranged for the eloping couple to stay here. "Miss Lin, wait a moment." Li called out to her. He walked back into the house and took something out. He handed her the account book that Lin Wanru gave him a few days ago. He said, "These 2 accounts have been checked. The details are in here. Miss Lin, take it back." Lin Wanru nodded, took the account book, and turned to leave. She had just sent the account book a few days ago. An accountant would need at least half a month to check all the accounts of the Lin family for an entire year. Moreover, Lin Wanru knew very well that he had been around Miss Lu for the past few days. He had been taking care of her in every possible way. How could he have had the time to check the accounts? Fortunately, he had already checked the accounts. He had only sent them for others to see so that they wouldn't gossip behind his back. Now that he had achieved his goal, he naturally had to take back the accounts. "That's right, who is Lin Shuwen?" Li Yi suddenly asked when Lin Wanru was about to leave. Lin Wanru turned her head and said, "My second uncle." "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Goodbye, Miss Lin." "Raise your hand a little higher. Did you not eat?" "Too slow. If you met a true expert, your head would have fallen off before you could stab with your sword. This time it was too fast. I didn't see it clearly. Let's do it again." As Lin Wanru walked out of the courtyard, she heard Miss Lu's voice coming from behind her. She looked behind her, shook her head, and left. The way this young man and woman interacted with each other was hard to understand. The woman was extremely beautiful, but her temperament was a little cold. She seemed to be fond of playing with knives and swords. Elder Lin had also said that she was a martial artist. As for that scholar, she had never seen him read a book. Every day he was busy in front of the stove. According to Brother Lin, the food he cooked was very delicious. Even the chefs of the restaurants couldn't compare. He didn't look like a scholar at all. Although he wasn't a scholar, his handwriting was so good that it was as good as the heavens. In private, she had also compared the words "a beauty meets for 1,000 years" to the calligraphy and paintings in her family collection. She felt that those words were not inferior to some famous calligraphers in the Qi kingdom. However, although it was strange, that scholar treated Miss Lu extremely well. If her aunt had met such a person in the past, she probably wouldn't have died with a grudge. Some thoughts emerged from the depths of her heart. Lin Wanru shook her head and suppressed those thoughts. What she needed to worry about at the moment was another matter. The people in the family, led by second uncle, had brought up some matters. In front of everyone, some of their words were very unpleasant to the ears. It was obvious that they were fighting for power. The second and third branches didn't have many resources in their hands. It was understandable that they wanted to force her to give up some of her power. Although she wasn't afraid of them, she naturally didn't want to see the peace in the family broken. "Did you hear? Young Miss hired an accountant from outside. I don't know anything about him." "I heard. He was placed next to the shop. I saw him the last time. I also heard that young Miss has an affair with that scholar." "It can't be. Then what should young Master Bai do?" When Lin Wanru walked in from outside, she saw the servants in the residence gathered together and whispered. When they saw her walking over, they quickly dispersed. Her expression didn't change as she walked straight back to her room. She placed the account book on the table and opened a book of poems. Not long after, a maid came in from outside and said, "Young Miss, second master wants you to go to the meeting hall." "Got it." Lin Wanru nodded and stood up. Her wrist accidentally brushed against the side of the table, and an account book was accidentally swept off. She bent down to pick up the account book. When she saw a few pieces of paper fall out, she was slightly startled. Lin Shuwen. At first glance, she saw a name written densely on that piece of paper. She also picked up the other pieces of paper. After looking at them carefully for a while, she put the account book to the side. It was only now that she finally understood what that scholar meant when he asked that question. Chapter 671. In the meeting room of the Lin family. Look at the accounts. The total income of the 3 shops last year was 10% less than that of the year before. The investment was obviously more, so there should be more surplus. This doesn't make sense. Lin Shuwen was the second eldest in the Lin family, and usually had a great say in the family. The eldest son of the Lin family died early, leaving only a daughter and a young son. It was reasonable to say that Lin Shuwen, as the second eldest, could take over all the business of the Lin family. However, no one expected that the head of the family would hand over all the business of the Lin family to Lin Wanru, who was a woman, before he died. Lin Wanru was the eldest daughter of the Lin family. Before she got married, she was also a member of the Lin family. Moreover, she had shown a talent for business since she was a child and had participated in the family business for a long time. For this arrangement, everyone was embarrassed to say anything. Of course, not many people cared about how many means a girl could have. These things could be slowly taken back from her. When she got married, she wouldn't be able to take anything with her. However, later they realized that they still looked down on this niece. In the past 2 years, the business of the Lin family was getting bigger and bigger in her hands, and others couldn't get involved. In the past 2 years, she could be said to have monopolized the economic power of the Lin family. At this time a young man said, "Second uncle, are you suspecting the eldest sister?" "I didn't say that." Lin Shuwen picked up a booklet, patted it on the table and said, "Anyway, the account book is here. The loss is the loss. I think Wanru has to give all of us an explanation for this matter." A middle-aged man thought for a moment, stood up and said, "Last year, the jewelry business was generally low, and it was inevitable that the profit was reduced. We can't blame all the problems on Wanru." Second brother is not blaming Wanru. She is in charge of the family business. We don't know what to do, so it is reasonable to ask. Yes, this is our family business. We can't always be blind. This is also for the sake of the Lin family. In the meeting hall, everyone was clearly divided into 3 camps. One of them was led by Lin Shuwen, who was holding on to the matter of profits. It was obvious that he had something else to say. The other side was speaking up for Lin Wanru, but there weren't many of them. Those who were neutral were still the majority. No matter what, it was not their turn to be in charge of the Lin family. No matter who the business was handed over to, they would get money every year. As long as there was a lot of money, there was no need for them to take sides. "Stop talking. Wanru is here. Let's see what she has to say." Someone suddenly stood up and said. Everyone turned to look at the door. Lin Wanru walked in from outside. She nodded slightly at everyone, then looked at Lin Shuwen and asked, "Second uncle, did you ask me to come here for something important?" "There is really one thing that is more important." Lin Shuwen nodded and said, "Yesterday, I looked through the account and found that the investment of our Lin family last year was 20% more than the year before. Why did the profit decrease? This is really unreasonable. The business of the Lin family has always been managed by Wanru. I'm afraid that Wanru has to give all of us an explanation for this matter, right?" Lin Wanru looked at him and asked, "In business, there are profits and losses. It is normal to have a small fluctuation in profit, isn't it?" Lin Shuwen smiled and said, "What Wanru said is true. There are profits and losses in business, but last year was obviously a good year. It is impossible for the profit not to increase but decrease. Of course, I don't mean anything else. It's just that the Lin family belongs to all of us. The Lin family needs all of us to protect it. It concerns the interests of all of us, so we can't be careless." Lin Shuwen had a smile on his face, as if he was thinking for everyone's sake. "So what do you mean, second uncle?" Lin Wanru looked at him and asked. Lin Shuwen said with a smile, "There are so many people in the Lin family. We also feel sorry to let you, a girl, take care of it inside and outside. Such a heavy burden falls on you. And it is inevitable that there will be such negligence. So, I think it is better to divide the other 2 shops and hand them over to others to manage. In this way, you will be much more relaxed and can concentrate more." The unspoken implication of his words was that Lin Wanru, as a woman, was unable to manage such a large Lin family. That was why there was a loss this time. It was better for her to give up her power early on. That way, everyone's interests could be guaranteed. "I think second uncle is right. Yes, Wanru should also have a good rest. I agree." As soon as Lin Shuwen finished his words, many people immediately responded. Many people in the Lin family had already complained about handing over the family business to a girl. Naturally, they would take the opportunity to push it. Even some people who had always been neutral were a little shaken. Lin Wanru sighed and said, "We are all family, second uncle. Why do you have to be so persistent?" Lin Shuan's expression changed when he heard that. He said, "Wanru, what do you mean? Second uncle is also thinking for the Lin family and for you. Do you think second uncle is harming you? So second uncle is really not going to let us go this time?" Lin Wanru looked at him again and said, You really take my good intentions for ill intentions." Lin Shuan said with a face full of anger, "I am doing this for the Lin family. Why can't you understand?" In that case, Lin Wanru looked at him and said, "From today onwards, second uncle doesn't need to worry about the supply of goods from the shop in the north of the city. I will arrange for someone else to take over." After saying that, she turned to look at the other two people and said, "Third uncle, fourth uncle, you don't need to go to the shop today. I will arrange for a new shopkeeper as soon as possible." As soon as Lin Wanru's voice fell, the hall suddenly became quiet. Many people raised their heads and looked at her in disbelief. How could she still say such words at this time? Lin Shuan was stunned. Instead of being angry, he laughed and said, "Wanru, do you really think that the Lin family is your Lin family? I'm afraid no one will agree to such an overbearing attitude." He looked back at the people in the hall and said, "You have all seen how overbearing she has been in the past 2 years. Since when did a woman have the right to be in charge of the Lin family? Second uncle, don't be so agitated." Lin Wanru shook her head and looked at him. She said, "When I came over just now, I sent someone to report to the authorities. Second uncle colluded with the Bai family who supplied the goods and took 17,652 taels of silver from the shop in a year. This is already more than 10% of the Lin family's annual profit. For embezzling so much silver, I'm afraid you will have to go to prison for decades. But second uncle, you don't need to worry. I will take care of everything after this for you. Aunt has entered the Lin family, so she is a member of the Lin family. You can go in peace. The family will take good care of her. If Aunt wants to remarry, we will find a good husband for her. Xiao Fei has already grown up and can take care of himself. The family will not mistreat him. You don't need to worry about this." Lin Wanru said these words calmly, but it set off a storm in the hearts of the people. You. Lin Shuan was stunned for a moment, and his expression changed greatly. He opened his mouth and was about to speak, but Lin Wanru waved her hand and said, "Second uncle, you don't need to thank me. We are all family. This is what I should do." After saying this, she added, "The people from the Yamen should be here soon. Second uncle, don't you want to go back and prepare?" Chapter 672. You don't have any evidence. Don't slander me. Lin Shuan's face turned from green to white, and then to green again. A trace of disbelief quickly appeared on his face, but it soon disappeared. He pointed at Lin Wanru and said, "You want to firmly control the Lin family and can't bear to let go of power, so you use this despicable method to frame your second uncle. You don't care about the Lin family. Do you still care about me, your second uncle?" "It's because I care about the Lin family and second uncle, so I wanted to suppress this matter." Lin Wanru sighed and said, "But after second uncle's reminder, Wanru suddenly realized that the Lin family is not my Lin family, nor is it second uncle's Lin family. It is everyone's Lin family. Everyone trusts me so much, but Wanru actually wants to play favorites. I'm really ashamed." As for the evidence, Lin Wanru took out a few pieces of paper from her sleeve and put them on the table beside her. She said, "These are the evidence of second uncle's corruption in the past year. They are written clearly one by one. Everyone take a look." Lin Shuan grabbed the pieces of paper and glanced at them. His face immediately turned pale and bloodless. He knelt on the ground and cried, Wanru, please let me go. Second uncle was wrong. Second uncle was bewitched. I beg you, don't report me to the authorities. I don't want to go to jail. The second master of the Lin family, who had been righteously indignant and said that he was thinking for the sake of the Lin family, was now in tears and snot. He no longer mentioned the matter of breaking up the shop. He knelt on the ground and cried bitterly, almost kowtowing. The others looked at each other when they saw this. Someone took the pieces of paper and glanced at them. His face immediately changed. Second brother, why did you? 18,000 taels of silver. You've taken all the money that was missing. You said Wanru, so it was you. Looking at Lin Xuan's performance, they didn't doubt the authenticity of these pieces of paper at all. The hall immediately burst into an uproar. Lin Wanru shifted her position slightly and stood beside Lin Xuan, not letting him face her directly. She looked at the crowd and said, "After all, this is our Lin family's matter. What do you all think we should do about it?" The noise in the hall decreased slightly. Everyone looked at each other and didn't say anything. This matter was really difficult to deal with. After all, Lin Xuan was a member of the Lin family. If they really took him to court, it would be a disgrace to the Lin family, and it would be detrimental to the stability of the Lin family. However, if they just let it go and pretend that they didn't see it, they wouldn't be able to convince the masses. After a moment, an old man sighed and said, "Although Xuan is wrong, he is still a member of our Lin family. We don't need to trouble the authorities with this matter, right?" Another man nodded and said, "Third uncle's words are reasonable. We shouldn't wash our dirty linen in public. If it gets out, our Lin family will become the laughingstock of Feng State City. We don't need to trouble the authorities. Wanru, what do you think we should do about this matter?" Someone shook his head and looked at Lin Wanru. Lin Xuan suddenly raised his head, and a glimmer of hope emerged in his eyes. Lin Wanru was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Second uncle, you don't need to worry about the supply of goods in the store. I will slowly deduct the money from the second branch's money." "Thank you, Wanru. Thank you, Wanru." Lin Xuan stood up from the ground, wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, and said repeatedly. Lin Wanru turned her head and looked at the other two men. "Third uncle, fourth uncle, you don't need to busy yourself with the matters of the store for the next 2 days. I will arrange for a new shopkeeper to go there in a few days." The two men were stunned. They weren't the ones who were embezzling. What did it have to do with them? Wanru, I'm afraid this isn't appropriate. One of the men opened his mouth with a troubled expression. Before he could finish his words, he was interrupted by someone behind him. "Let's do it this way. Wanru, you can arrange these things. We will listen to you when it comes to the business." Yes. Third brother, fourth brother, just do what I ask you to do. Why are you asking so many questions? Someone else said. Okay. Seeing that people kept speaking up, the two men's faces gradually showed despair. In the end, they could only grit their teeth and agree. "The store is busy. If there's nothing else, I will leave first." Lin Wanru looked at the crowd and said, No. Wanru, you go ahead. The matter of the store is more important. It's fine here. Remember to inform the authorities and say that it's a misunderstanding." When the crowd heard this, they all spoke up. If it wasn't necessary, they wouldn't want to stay with her. Even if she stood there without saying a word, she would give them an invisible layer of pressure. Today was clearly a drama of the second branch forcing the Lin family to abdicate. In the end, the second, third, and fourth branches suffered a double loss. They had completely lost their business with the Lin family. Delegating power had turned into taking it back. In the future, her words in the Lin family would only have more weight. Watching her leave, then looking at Lin Xuan, who was covered in cold sweat, many people secretly shook their heads. They had underestimated the eldest daughter of the Lin family. Lin Yong leaned against the door and grinned. When he saw Lin Wanru coming out, he hurriedly followed her. "Miss, where are we going now?" Lin Wanru walked past a moon door and said, "To the store." Lin Yong scratched his head and asked doubtfully, To the store? Isn't that going to the yamen?" "Why are we going to the yamen?" Lin Wanru said as she walked. "There's a new batch of goods that was delayed for 2 days. Remember to hurry them up. Won't the authorities send people to arrest second master?" Lin Yong was stunned, but he didn't care too much. Of course, he wanted to go to the store and not the yamen. Seeing that it was almost mealtime, it wasn't a bad idea to go to the Li brothers' place for a bowl of porridge. To be honest, he had never tasted such delicious porridge in his life. Although it wasn't full, He felt full of energy after drinking it. He could finally raise his head in front of his mother-in-law at night. It was just that he was prone to nosebleeds after eating, so he always had a cloth to block it. In the small courtyard next to Fonglan Park, the mealtime today was 15 minutes earlier than usual. If it was mealtime and Brother Lin got 2 bowls of porridge, there wouldn't be enough food for 2 people. These were all things that burned money. Times were different now. Even a penny had to be split in half. With those medicinal herbs, Mississippi Lou's body recovered very well. Now she could walk on her own without help. Of course, she still couldn't use her true chi. Most of the time, she could only listen obediently. Li could do whatever he wanted for the time being, and didn't have to worry about her revenge. However, he had to think of another way to earn more money. This time he couldn't find a jade pendant that was worth 1,000 taels of silver. Just as he was worrying, there was a knock on the door. Lin Yong didn't have the habit of knocking on the door. Li looked up at Lin Wanru and asked, "Has the matter of the account been settled?" After all, he had received so much kindness from the girl. If he could do something for her, it would be a way to repay the favor. "It's settled." Lin Wanru nodded and said, "Thank you this time." If it weren't for those pieces of paper, the matter this time would actually be a little troublesome. She had never doubted that there would be so many problems with the accounts that had been checked. This time, the scholar that she picked up really gave her a big surprise. Li waved his hand and said, "You're welcome. This is the duty of an accountant." A rare smile appeared on Lin Wanru's face. She said, "It's just a temporary measure. You don't have to take it seriously. To be honest, this time, you have indeed helped me solve a big problem." Nearly 20,000 taels of silver had permanently swept away the unstable elements within the family. A few days ago, Lin Wanru had never thought that this scholar she had picked up from the streets would be of such great help to her. Lin Wanru looked at him and said, "I don't like to owe favors. If you have any difficulties, feel free to tell me. If it's something that I can do, I will do my best to help you." Li looked at her and asked, "Do you really have to thank me?" Lin Wanru nodded. "To be honest, I don't like to owe favors either." Li thought for a moment and said, "Actually, in the past, when someone asked me to check the accounts, something terrible would happen. The price was not small. But this time, let's forget about it. You've helped me, and I've helped you. We don't owe each other anything. How about it?" Lin Wanru nodded and turned to walk outside. When she reached the door, she stopped and turned back to ask, "I don't know. What do you mean by something terrible?" After saying this, she felt that this sentence was a little redundant. Without waiting for Li to answer, she shook her head and turned to leave. In the courtyard, Li sighed and said slowly, "The court is unstable. Officials are stripped of their titles, their properties are confiscated, and they are exiled. People are beheaded." Chapter 673. Confiscation, Banishment, Beheading. Lin Wanru murmured as she walked back to the shop. Then, she shook her head and walked into the shop. When the man called Lin Yong saw her, he immediately walked over and said with a smile, "Miss, we really made the right decision to buy this horse this time. Many people have come to see it these past few days. There's a lot more business every day than before." Colored glaze was a treasure among treasures. It was rare to see it, even in a jewelry store, let alone such a large horse stepping on a swallow. These days, the flow of customers in Fonglan Garden had greatly increased. Although many people came to see the colored glaze and gain knowledge, it was indeed a great boost to the business of the shop. Lin Yong looked at the colored glaze with his eyes shining. He said, "Many people came to inquire about the price of this treasure, but I refused them all. This is the most precious treasure of our Fonglan Garden. I won't sell it no matter how much money you offer." In a small courtyard next to Fragrant Forest Park, Li was fanning the fire with a small fan in his hand. He had wanted to remind Miss Lin to sell off the flying swallow grass while it was still possible. If some ill-intentioned person came to the kingdom of Qi and tried to sell it off as soon as possible, this thing would be ruined. However, after being disturbed by her just now, he completely forgot about this matter. He could only think about it next time. Mississippi Lou had been recuperating at home these days. She didn't go out at all. If she stayed for a long time, she might get sick. Therefore, he planned to go out with her at night. On the one hand, it was to relax. On the other hand, he could experience the nightlife of the people in the Qi Kingdom. If it weren't for Mississippi Liu, he could also study the similarities and differences of the brothel culture between the Qi Kingdom and the Jing Kingdom. As an important political and military city, the curfew system in Fengzhou City was very strict. For many cities in the back of the city, nightlife just started after 9 p.m. But in this city, people were not allowed to appear on the streets after 9 p.m. The consequences of violating this prohibition were very serious. However, the more severe and oppressive the system was, the more brilliant and prosperous things would be born. The night market in the city, which was even busier than during the day, was a product of this. In less than 2 hours, the whole city was in a carnival. A narrow river flowed through the city. The surface of the river was sparkling. Pleasure boats passed through it. Pedestrians weaved along the riverbank. The hawkers along the street shouted their wares incessantly. The tea houses and taverns along the street were thriving. Sitting on a tall building by the water, he took a sip of wine and looked down at the women dancing gracefully with their sleeves fluttering in the wind. Li sighed. How long had it been since he had been so carefree? This was just a city at the border of the Qi Kingdom, but it gave people a feeling that it was more prosperous than the capital of the Jing Kingdom. After coming to the Qi Kingdom, Li deeply felt that it was not without reason that the Jing Kingdom had been suppressed by them for so many years. Putting down the wine cup, he casually slapped away Mississippi Liu's hand that was reaching for the wine pot. He glanced at her and said, "My body hasn't recovered yet. I don't know if I can drink." "Just 1 cup." Mississippi Liu looked at him and said, "Not even 1 cup." Li refused without hesitation. Mississippi Liu glared at him, but she did not insist. Li looked at her with satisfaction. He felt a sense of accomplishment in his heart. Recently, Mississippi Liu had become more and more obedient. If she could maintain this attitude after she recovered, how wonderful would life be? Next up is Miss Yingying. Young Master Zhao presents her with 100 taels of silver. Chen presents her with 300 taels of silver. Young Master Yang presents her with a poem. Young Master Qian presents her with 1,000 taels of silver. The voices that came from downstairs from time to time always interrupted his daydream. Li looked discontentedly at the high platform below. At this moment, there was a new girl on the high platform. She was holding a pipa and playing it while performing difficult dance moves. It was very tempting. No wonder those young masters were giving her poems like crazy. In the blink of an eye, a few hundred taels of silver were already in her hands. All she had to do was twist her waist. Li was very envious of her. If he had this kind of ability, he would not have to worry about money. Not long after the song ended, the duck-like voice called out again. Miss Yingying invites young Master Yang upstairs for a chat. There was a sudden uproar below. Many people had just given silver taels of silver, but this Miss Yingying just had to invite young Master Yang, who gave the poem upstairs. It seemed that the poem had moved Miss Yingying. Some people were envious while others sighed. Wealth was easy to come by, but talent was hard to come by. These famous prostitutes in Feng Province were proficient in music, chess, calligraphy, and painting. No matter which one of them, they could be crowned as a talented woman. Their daily contacts were all famous talents from all walks of life. They had never been interested in idiots who only knew how to throw money. "Why are you moved?" Mississippi Liu glanced at Li and asked casually when she saw him looking down with an envious face. Li nodded and said, "Yes, 1,000 taels of silver, but it didn't even make a splash. It's such a pity. If you gave it to us, you would have enough medicine for next month." Mississippi Liu was startled. Then she shook her head and said, "Medicinal herbs are just auxiliary. It's not necessary." That being said, the sooner Mississippi Liu recovered, the sooner they could go back. Li sighed. "You can't stop taking medicine." Below the pavilion, the topic of the crowd had shifted from Miss Yingying to another woman on the stage. At this moment, the woman who was dancing to the music was also a famous prostitute in Feng Province. In terms of fame, she was no less than the former. A slightly chubby young man dressed like a scholar, and holding a folding fan in his hand sighed, and turned away from the crowd. Hey, isn't this the rich young master who throws money away? There are still a lot of programs later. Why did he leave so early? Young Master Ying threw money away, but he still couldn't win Miss Ying's heart. What a pity, what a pity. Several voices came from the front. The slightly chubby young man looked up and saw a group of young people coming over. His expression changed slightly. I don't want to cause trouble today. Get out of the way, he said in a low voice. Then he forcefully pushed the crowd aside and strode outside. Humph, he's just a guy who stinks of money. Why is he pretending to be a scholar? Does he really think that holding a folding fan makes him a scholar? He even wants to attract Miss Ying's attention. He's just a toad lusting for swan meat. He's just an idiot. If it weren't for his rich father, I'm afraid he wouldn't even be able to enter this place. Hearing the mocking voices coming from behind, the young man's body trembled. His face turned pale, but his footsteps became faster. Bullsh *T scholar. So what if he can write a few poems? At the entrance of the pavilion, the slightly chubby young man stood by the side of the road. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. Although he said so, his face was full of unwillingness and helplessness. He looked back again and was ready to leave. What's wrong? Are you unwilling? At this moment, an abrupt voice suddenly came from the dark alley beside him. The voice was full of temptation. The young man suddenly turned his head and looked into the darkness. He asked vigilantly, "Who is it?" Chapter 674. Who are you? Hearing the voice in the dark alley, the slightly plump young man took a few steps back. Looking at the figure in the dark, his gaze was still vigilant as he asked slowly, "It doesn't matter who I am." In the dark alley, the voice drifted, faintly discernible. "What's important is that I can help you." The young man asked suspiciously, "Help me with what?" The voice said leisurely, "So that you don't have to worry about not being able to write a good poem. You don't have to worry about not being able to get a girl. You don't have to worry about being mocked by those so-called scholars." Not being able to get a girl? The man asked doubtfully. "No woman will care about you." The voice raised its pitch. The young man was stunned for a moment before realizing something. He blurted out, "You want to teach me how to write a poem?" This time, the voice paused for a long time. "Do you think you're cut out for it?" "What do you mean?" The young man asked doubtfully. "It's very simple. You hand over the money and I hand over the poem. You hand over the money and I'll give you the poem. Once you hand over the money, the poem is yours. You can sign your name and use it however you want." The young man hesitated for a moment before saying, "How do I know you're not just casually writing a few sentences to trick me? Why do you have so many questions?" The voice in the dark became impatient. "Buy it if you want. If not, I'm leaving." "Wait a minute." Some images appeared in his mind. The young man clenched his fists. After his expression changed, he gritted his teeth and asked, "How much is your poem?" "Ranging from 100 taels to 10,000 taels. There are many prices and many choices. We can accept custom-made poems. Love between men and women, brotherly love, gay love, patriotism. Buy 5, get 1 free. Buy 10, get 3 free. The price is fair." The young man asked doubtfully, "Your poem can surpass that, Yang? If you just want to surpass that poem, I suggest you buy one that costs 100 taels. If you want to amaze the world and impress that Ying lady, 1,000 taels is enough. If you're willing to pay 10,000 taels, Zhao Xiuwen will be nothing. In the future, you'll be the new poetry saint of the Qi kingdom." The voice was extremely fleeting and full of charm. It came from the dark. "How about it? Do you want to consider it?" "I want 1,000 taels." After a moment of silence, there was a response from outside. "Just a moment." Something seemed to move in the darkness. The young man seemed to hear a strange sound, and then it went silent. After a quarter of an hour, a voice came from the darkness again. Then, the young man saw a folded piece of paper being handed out from the darkness. He carefully walked over and reached out his hand. The piece of paper shrunk a little. He was taken aback for a moment, then he came back to his senses. He fumbled in his bosom for a while, then handed over a stack of paper and said, "There's a total of 1,000 taels of silver here. You can exchange it for silver at any Qian's bank in the Qi kingdom. Aren't you afraid that I'll lie to you?" After receiving the banknotes, the voice in the darkness came again. The slightly plump young man shook his head and said, "It's only about 1,000 taels of silver. I'll have it if I save a day's allowance." There was no more sound in the darkness. He held the piece of paper and waited for a while. When he gathered his courage and walked into the alley, he found that there was no one there. "Where did you go just now?" After Li Yi returned upstairs and sat down, Mississippi Lu glanced at him and asked, "I went downstairs to get some fresh air and bought some things." Li Yi put a bag of desserts on the table. He bought them from the shop where he borrowed pen and paper. They tasted pretty good. He had to admit that the guy just now was quite bold. He gave away 1,000 taels of silver without hesitation. Even when Li Yi was at his most prodigal, he didn't do this. He always gave 120,000 taels of silver to Mississippi Lu. He was a little thirsty after talking nonsense with that guy for a long time. The alcohol content here wasn't high, so it could be used as a drink to quench his thirst. Li Yi picked up the wine pot. Not a drop of wine was poured out. He looked at Mississippi Lu and gradually narrowed his eyes. "It's getting late. I should go back and rest." Mississippi Lu stood up decisively and turned to walk downstairs. Li Yi walked down with a sullen face. When he walked out of the door, he brushed past a slightly chubby young man. "Stop right there. Don't think that this matter will be over just like that." After a slight pause, he strode in the direction of Mississippi Lu. The young man looked back strangely, shook his head, and turned around. After almost an hour, he walked into the attic again. In the hall, several young people dressed like scholars gathered together. They watched the program on the screen while whispering to each other. "That guy with the surname Qian really thinks that he can buy anything with money. We don't want to be associated with such a vulgar person. That guy with the surname Qian is a joke. Let's not talk about him. Do you think that Miss Ying will be able to sleep with Yang Yanqing today? Impossible. Although Yang Yanqing has some talent in poetry, he's far behind his brother. I think Miss Ying is only doing this for that person's sake. Otherwise, I'm afraid she wouldn't be able to meet him today. I've long heard that Miss Ying is interested in that person. However, with her status, she's still too far behind. Maybe she's going to settle for the second best. It's also possible. After all, that person is appreciated by the third prince. Miss Ying is not worthy of him." A few people were chatting about some things when they were suddenly interrupted by a voice. "Qian duo, young Master Qian. Give Miss Shishir a poem." In the past, when a lady performed on the stage, if there was a gift of money or a poem, someone would read it out loud to let everyone know. After all, many people did it for the sake of their reputation. If there was no splash of water, they might not do the same thing again in the future. Therefore, in such a place, there would be someone in charge of this matter. Those who frequented this place were already used to it. However, this time when they heard this sentence, many people were stunned. This included the lady named Shishir who was playing on the stage. Her pretty face was filled with astonishment, and her music was a little chaotic. They naturally knew who Qian Duo was. He was the famous young Master Qian in Fengzhou City. The Qian family's banks were opened all over the Qi kingdom. Their business was flourishing everywhere. In the entire Fengzhou City, there were not many families that were richer than the Qian family. The son of a businessman was looked down upon by others. He should have kept a low profile. However, this young Master Qian did not know how to keep a low profile at all. Usually, he boasted that he was a gifted scholar and often lingered in such places. He had spent a lot of money several times, but he did not even get to see the face of a lady. He had become a laughingstock in the eyes of the crowd. Everyone knew that this young Master Qian was a complete idiot. At this time, he was learning from others to compose a poem. Haha, young Master Qian, a poem? Read it quickly read it out. Let us see what kind of masterpiece young Master Qian has. No, read it later. Let me laugh for a while. In an instant, some people could not help but laugh out loud. The atmosphere in the hall became a little lively. In their eyes, young Master Qian knew how to compose a poem. It was no different from a rooster laying eggs or an iron tree blooming. It was simply a fantasy. At this moment, the crowd only treated it as a joke. Hearing the various voices around him, Qian Duoduo's expression changed. He pretended to be indifferent, but his fists in his sleeves were already tightly clenched. He had read the poem just now. Although he could not see anything special about it, it was quite smooth to read. There was one word that he did not know. He only found out after asking someone. It should be better than that surnamed Yang, right? In the corner, there was a person holding a piece of paper in his hand. Under the urging of the crowd, he read it out loud. Kaixio attentively held the jade bell. That year, she fought to be drunk and blushed. Dancing low in the willow house under the moon, she sang the wind at the bottom of the peach blossom fan. After parting, I remembered our meeting. How many times did my soul dream with you? Tonight, with only the silver lamp shining, I fear that our meeting is a dream. Those who could linger in this kind of place were mostly scholars. They usually boasted that they were outstanding and talented. Those they interacted with were all scholars. More or less, they had some talent. Otherwise, they would not have been able to fool the crowd. After that person read 2 lines, the mocking voices in the hall quieted down. Until the last line, I fear that our meeting is a dream, was read out. There was no more noise. Countless people were stunned. They turned around to look at Qian Duoduo and swallowed their saliva in disbelief. Was this poem really written by that idiot Qian Duoduo? The woman on the stage was also stunned. She muttered a few lines and felt some kind of emotion. When she looked down the stage again, her eyes were a little hazy. At the door of a certain room upstairs, the woman called Yingying opened her mouth slightly. The man opposite her was also surprised. Even if Qian Duoduo did not understand poetry, because of his background, his ability to observe people's expressions was far beyond that of ordinary people. Looking at the eyes and expressions of the people around him, he knew that the 1,000 taels he spent just now was really King worth it. Especially when he saw those so-called scholars. Their expressions were as if they had seen a ghost. The carefree feeling in his heart was indescribable. He hummed a strange tune and walked out of the door alone under the stunned silence of the crowd. Just as he was about to walk out, he seemed to have thought of something. He turned around and walked to a table. The servant looked at him in a daze and asked, "Young Master Qian, is there anything else?" Qian Duoduo curled his lips and said, "That 1,000 taels of silver was wrong. Give it back to me. I can't control you, but your sister can. When I go back in a few days, I will tell her everything you did here one by one." There was still an hour before the curfew. The streets of Feng State City had already become sparse. Li Yi scolded as he walked. He did not hear a response for a long time. He looked back and saw that Mississippi Lu was already breathing evenly. He shook his head and sighed helplessly. "I can't control it anymore." The 3 words "fragrant forest garden" were vaguely visible under the illumination of the fireworks in the night sky. Chapter 675. Wearing a bamboo hat, Li Yi came out of the pharmacy with a lot of things in his hands. The fat man didn't lie to him last night. When he handed over the money to buy these herbs, the shop assistant accepted it without hesitation. Along the way, he saw 2 banks on the street. The name of the bank was Bank. It seemed simple and crude, but it had a profound meaning. It was because it was opened by a big family surnamed Qian. When people talked about it, they would feel that all the banks in the world were their own homes. The Qian family was very famous in Fengzhou City because of their wealth. Fengzhou City was prosperous, and there were many rich families. Some of them were new families, and some were well-known families with deep heritage. The Qian family belonged to the former, and it couldn't be more new. It was said that the master of the Qian family was originally a destitute laborer. However, he had unexpectedly made a fortune more than 10 years ago. He had started by unloading goods from ships. Then he had slowly started a small business. Step by step, he had expanded his business. After 10 years, the wealth accumulated by the Qian family had surpassed most of the so-called rich and powerful families in Fengzhou City. Including those well-known families with decades of heritage, the wealth of the Qian family could be ranked in the top 5 in the entire Fengzhou City. In other words, the number of families in the entire Fengzhou city that were richer than the Qian family could be counted on one hand. Although power and money couldn't be separated since ancient times, the reality was that those with power had money, and those with money didn't necessarily have power. Especially in today's era, businessmen were lowly. The richer they were, the more they had to accept the ridicule and indifference of others. The Qian family was such an existence. They were different from those families that had accumulated wealth and reputation for hundreds of years. In the eyes of most people, they were villains, landlords, and nouveau riche. They weren't recognized by the upper class. Unlike the later generations, this kind of people were successful entrepreneurs, leading the trend of success studies, and idols in the hearts of countless confused youths. They could write books such as Qian Naiji's Success Studies, The Law of Success, Chicken Soup for Success, and so on. They could be sold out. This information was obtained by Li Yi from an insider. At that time, the insider was blocked by him in the corner. He shouted, "Hero, please spare my life," and told him the story of the Qian family's prosperity. He even told him that the head of the Qian family kept a concubine in a small building, and that young Master Qian and a scholar were suspected to have a homosexual fetish. Before leaving, the insider sincerely suggested that if he wanted to rob the money, he should go straight along this road and then turn left. The biggest and most luxurious mansion with a silver lion at the door should be the one. This was the information he politely inquired. As for yesterday's young Master Qian's wish, he didn't know yet. He didn't have many poems, but all of them were fine works. Yan Jidao's style of poetry was deep and profound, and he was good at expressing emotions. His achievements in literature were even higher than his father, Yan Shu's, in both the current and future generations. Yan Jidao was someone who didn't even take Sushir seriously. He didn't have many poems, but all of them were excellent. Due to the problems in his life, there were many poems in his poems that sympathized with the fate of prostitutes and dancers, and praised their beautiful souls. His style was sad and touching. Which young girl doesn't yearn for love? Which young woman doesn't? Even prostitutes and dancers must have a lover in their hearts that they are looking forward to meeting. Because of their status, they yearn for beautiful things and feelings. Unfortunately, due to their status and age, most women can't obtain the happiness they hope for. If this emotional partridge sky were to be circulated, who knows how many women's hearts would be pierced? Li Yi didn't know if those women's hearts were pierced, but his own heart was pierced. With the help of medicinal materials, Mississippi Lu's body recovered quickly. This time, he gritted his teeth and spent 500 taels of silver to buy medicinal materials of higher quality and older. If he could sell a few more poems, he and Mississippi Lu would soon be able to return home. Half of the 10 banknotes were gone in a short time. Rich people could only be found by chance. Li Yi was a little regretful. He should have left his contact information yesterday. Although he knew where the Qian family was, he couldn't go to them with a mask like this, wearing a bamboo hat and walking on the street. Many people turned their heads. If it weren't for the fact that some people in Jianghu often dress like this, people wouldn't be too surprised. Perhaps they would be invited to tea by the patrolling soldiers after a while. At a certain moment, a man wearing a bamboo hat walked into a deep alley. Not long after, a young man came out from the other side of the alley. Li Yi looked at the sky. He had been delayed on the road today. He had to hurry back to cook for Mississippi Lu. Fenglin Garden was just ahead. When Li Yi walked over, he greeted Lin Yong, who was leaning against the door. He walked to a small courtyard and gently knocked on the door. Today, Mississippi Lu took a long time to open the door. Li Yi looked at her suspiciously. He pointed at her face and asked, "What's wrong with you? Didn't you wash your face when you woke up this morning?" Mississippi Lu's expression was a little unnatural. She wiped her face with her sleeves and said, "Go wash your hands. It's time to eat." "You went out to buy food?" Li Yi walked into the house and said, "Didn't I say to wait for me to come back? Your body hasn't recovered yet. It's dangerous outside." He looked at the unknown object on the table and looked up at Mississippi Lu. He asked, Where did you buy this food from? Eat it if you want." Mississippi Lu glanced at him and turned around to walk back to her room. Li Yi reached out his chopsticks and picked up the paste in front of him. He vaguely recognized that this should be green vegetables. As for the other plate, he could only say that he was not knowledgeable enough. He looked at the rice again. Forget it, he could not bear to look anymore. This was obviously the work of Mississippi Lu. No wonder her face was black and white just now. She was also wearing an apron around her waist. Other people were men who worked hard to earn money to support their families. When they returned home, the women had already prepared a table full of delicious food for them. Mississippi Lu was also waiting for him, waiting to poison him to death. Just as Li Yi was facing the unknown object on the table and was at a loss of what to do, Lin Yong walked in from the door with a smile and said, "Li brothers eating. Brother Lin, you haven't eaten yet, right?" Li Yi looked up at him and was stunned for a moment. He immediately said, "Sit down and eat with us." This is so embarrassing. Lin Yong rubbed his hands and sat opposite Li Yi in embarrassment. He looked at Li Yi in surprise. He felt that the Li brothers seemed to be very friendly to him today. Li Yi handed him the chopsticks and said with a smile, "Don't stand on ceremony. I've made a lot of food today. Brother Lin, you can eat as much as you want." "Haha, then I won't stand on ceremony." Lin Yong took the chopsticks and laughed. He asked, "Where's the food? Is it not here yet?" "Li brothers, you sit down. I'll go get it." His eyes inadvertently swept across the table and asked in confusion, "What is this?" "This is it." Li Yi looked at him and said sincerely, "What is it?" Lin Yong looked confused. Li Yi pushed the two dishes over and said, "I've already eaten outside. Brother Lin, don't stand on ceremony. Do you want me to help you get 2 more bowls of rice?" Lin Yong lowered his head to take a look and finally realized something. His expression changed. "Haha, I'm so embarrassed to eat here every day, Li brothers." Lin Yong put down the chopsticks and strode outside. He said apologetically, "I suddenly remembered that Miss was looking for me. I'll go and ask her first. It's okay." Lin Wanru came in from outside. She looked at him and said, "The shop is not too busy now. You eat your food. I have something to ask Li." She turned to look at Li Yi and said, "I wonder if it's convenient for Li to come over now." Li Yi stood up and patted Lin Yong's shoulder. He said, "Brother Lin, food is precious. Don't waste it." Lin Yong stood up and looked down at the table. His face instantly turned pale. Chapter 676. In the courtyard, Lin Yong picked up his chopsticks, carefully picked up a piece of vegetable, and put it into his mouth. He chewed twice, making crunching sounds. In the next moment, his expression changed drastically. He put down his chopsticks and rushed out of the door. On the other side, Li Yi followed Lin Wanru through Fonglin Park and came to a room behind the shop. Lin Wanru poured him a cup of tea and said, "Take a seat first. I'll go get the account book. There are a few places that I don't quite understand. The way you keep accounts is very special." Li Yi nodded and sat down at the table in the room. The layout of Fonglin Park was similar to that of Rui Square. At the front was a shop, and at the back was a place for people to rest. There were not many furnishings in this room. There were tables, chairs, beds, and cabinets. Everywhere was simple. The most eye-catching thing was the mini calligraphy paintings hanging on the walls. Although they were called calligraphy paintings, they were actually just words. Li Yi knew that this Miss Lin was a person who loved calligraphy. The works hanging in her room were not the best, but they were of a certain standard. There were books on the table, as well as some neatly stacked manuscripts. When Li Yi skimmed to the top page, he was slightly stunned. The reason why he was stunned was not only because this was the poem Partridge Sky that he had sold to the fat man yesterday, but also because this handwriting was Wang Shiji's semi-cursive script. The ink on the paper was still wet, and it was clearly written not long ago. Women in this world, as long as they studied in primary school, would all use the hairpin-style small regular script. It was rare to see a semi-cursive script. He picked up the paper and looked at it doubtfully. "It's not a good imitation. Please excuse me." Lin Wanru's voice came from the side. She said, "In the Jing Kingdom, you should often see the handwriting of that #1 scholar. Otherwise, you can't imitate it so well. Ever since Zhao Xiuwen spread this handwriting, Many people in the Qi Kingdom have begun to imitate it. I have to say, among these people, you are the best at imitating. Li Yi was stunned for a moment. He nodded and said, I see it quite often. Just a moment ago, she was still puzzled. When he copied the poem yesterday, he had used a different style of writing. After knowing her for so long, she did not expect that this Miss Lin was also his fan. Life was really full of surprises. Li Yi pointed at the paper and asked, this poem? They said it came from Qingshui River last night. Zhao Xiaowen hasn't had any poems recently. It's been a long time since I've seen such a good poem. Li Yi nodded and didn't ask any more questions. It seemed that the man wouldn't think that his money was wasted. As if she had thought of something, Lin Wanru asked again, the poems composed by that #1 scholar of yours have long spread throughout the Qi Kingdom. Did he compose any new poems after that? I don't know much about poetry, and I've never paid attention to it. Li Yi shook his head and said, you just said that you have questions for me. Lin Wanru also didn't continue this topic. She flipped open the account book and pointed at a certain part of it. She said, I'm still not clear about these accounts. Can you explain them to me? Of course. Li Yi nodded and shifted his gaze over. After about a quarter of an hour, Lin Wanru held a piece of paper in her hands that she had just calculated. After looking at it carefully for a few times, she carefully put it away. At the same time, in the small courtyard that was separated by a wall, Li Yi put on his apron and glanced at Mississippi Lu. He said, there's no time to cook. There's still some white rice left from yesterday. Let's make do with egg fried rice for breakfast. The heavens had given her the face of an angel. With the strength of a devil, she had to collect some commission somewhere else. In this life, he didn't expect Mississippi Lu to cook. Li Yi was already very pleased that she had the intention to do so. In the afternoon, the man named Lin Yong didn't come over for a free meal. He only went out for a stroll like he did yesterday. After eating, he would exercise a little and sleep with Mississippi Lu after the sunset. They slept separately. He didn't know if practicing the tortoise breathing technique had any healing effects. However, at least he could fall asleep immediately when he was bored. From then on, he wouldn't have to suffer from insomnia anymore. Li Yi turned off the light and looked at the other side of the room that was separated by a piece of cloth. He slowly closed his eyes when he heard the sound of even breathing coming from the other side. The small courtyard quickly fell into silence. Outside the courtyard, the place a few streets away gradually became noisy. No matter which city it was, the most prosperous and noisy place would always be the red light district. The Qingshui River passed through Feng State City. There were many lofts on both sides of the river. Although it was also a place of pleasure, it was slightly more classy. Most of them didn't engage in the naked business of sex. Instead, they were scholars, singers, dancers, lovers, and happy things. Although Feng State City was remote, it was far away from the war. The people lived in peace. Both sides of the Qingshui River were naturally jubilant tonight. In a small building somewhere, the famous prostitute of Feng State, Hu Yingying, was performing on stage. She was performing her famous skill, the rebound pipa. In the entire Feng State, she was the only one who could perform this kind of dance to the extreme. Hu Yingying also relied on this unique skill to look down on all the other beauties and become the star of this small building. In the past, every time she performed the rebound pipa, there would be no empty seats. However, today, although there were many people below the stage, it was far less than in the past. Among the whispers of the people below, the words, Young Master Qian, would occasionally appear. Everyone here knew that young Master Qian was interested in Hu Yingying. However, Miss Hu Yingying, who was famous in Feng State, naturally looked down on that fat guy who reeked of money. Even though he had spent a lot of money several times, she still accepted the money and never asked to meet him alone. This kind of thing was very normal. However, yesterday, the ignorant and incompetent young Master Qian actually got a good poem from somewhere and gave it to another lady in the building. Not only that, but he also took back the 1,000 taels of silver that he gave to Hu Yingying. If it was in the past, this kind of behavior would naturally attract ridicule from the crowd. However, yesterday they couldn't laugh at all. That was because the poem was really beyond their expectations. The whole poem was only about 50 words, but it vividly expressed the first alliance, separation, and reunion between a man and a woman. Writing about sorrow, writing about joy, they were all so sincere and deep that they could shake one's heart. His words were the voice of one's heart. Only a person with true feelings could write such poems. To be able to write such poems, one must also be a person with true feelings. Of course, no one believed that the person who was deeply in love was Richie young master Qian Duoduo. He was probably annoyed by Hu Yingying and bought poems to give to others. Then he asked for the money back in order to humiliate her. He had to admit that he had achieved his goal. That sincere poem really touched many people, especially evoking some emotions in the hearts of many singers and dancers. Overnight, it spread across both sides of Qingshui River. The most discussed topic was the poem written by young Master Qian. Where did he buy it from? Hu Yingying lost face and her popularity plummeted. On the other hand, the girl named Shi's popularity rose by a large margin. In a single night, she replaced Hu Yingying and became the most popular girl here. Even if Hu Yingying used her famous skills tonight, she still couldn't turn the tide. The phrase, "I'm afraid that we'll meet again in a dream," made many girls cry. Although they despised young Master Qian Duoduo's behavior of buying the poem, they couldn't blame him for seeing such an excellent piece of work. Instead, there were people who tried to find out who wrote the poem. However, young Master Qian Duoduo insisted that he was the one who wrote the poem and refused to budge. Many people had no choice but to leave. I should have bought 100 taels of silver. That night, on the street beside the river, a slightly plump young man stood at the entrance of an alley. He paced anxiously as he muttered to himself. Initially, he thought that by throwing the poem out, he would be able to shock everyone and let Hu Yingying see that he was a real talent. Then he would turn around and leave, regaining all the dignity that he had lost in the past. However, who would have thought that he would achieve his goal? Early this morning, the Qian family's doorstep was almost trampled through. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and ran out from the back door. Only then did he barely escape the calamity. At this moment, he finally knew that after telling the first lie, he would have to use countless lies to cover it up. The brother in the dark indeed didn't lie to him. A poem worth 1,000 taels of silver was indeed worth 1,000 taels of silver. He decided to buy one worth 10,000 taels of silver first. In the future, if he saw any lousy scholar that he didn't like, he would use the poem to smash them to death. A figure walked out of the alley. Qian Duoduo immediately went up and asked anxiously, "Brother, is that you?" The man who walked out of the alley was stunned for a moment. Then he said angrily, "How dare you scold my mother?" While Qian Duoduo was stunned, a fist swung over from the front. Note: in ancient Chinese, there are also terms for father and mother. These two terms have existed since ancient times and are not foreign words. In ancient times, mother did not necessarily refer to a brothel keeper. I suddenly remembered that I wrote an empty poem. What's the point of explaining this? To make up the number of words? Chapter 677. Bang. Qian Duoduo kicked the man into the alley. He curled his lips and said, "Do you really think that the 2 kilograms of meat on my body are just for show? If you want to fight with me, go back and eat for a few more years." He clapped his hands and turned around to look at the bustling street. A vexed expression appeared on his face as he murmured, "Brother, where the hell are you?" Bang. In a certain room in the attic, a woman named Hu Yingying fiercely threw her pipa to the ground. Her face was filled with anger as she coldly said, "Surname Qian, you've gone too far." Okay, you still have the face to talk about others?" The madam stood behind her and glanced at her. She said, "How many times do I have to tell you not to be too unsightly when you eat? You don't even try to win over your sugar daddy. Instead, you flirt with those poor scholars all day. How do you think you so-called famous courtesans came to be? It's all because of money. This time, I'll teach you a lesson. All of you, be more careful." Hu Yingying said with a straight face, "But, no buts." The madam waved her hand and said, "Find time to properly apologize to young Master Qian." Let me tell you, if you have the surname Qian in the future, you'll enjoy endless glory and wealth. The money that old Master Qian spills out from between his fingers is enough to buy this entire building. I might even have to listen to your face. Tell me, what's so good about those poor scholars? If you follow them, you deserve to suffer for the rest of your life. Hu Yingying gritted her teeth and didn't say anything else. The madam glanced at her and walked out of the room. When she reached the door, she turned around and said, "Don't tell me that you're still thinking about that person. Let me give you a piece of advice. Give up. You're just a prostitute, you can't reach his level." Hu Yingying raised her head and gritted her teeth. She said, "Yingying understands. Afraid that we'll meet again in a dream. Xiuwen, do you think this poem was really written by that young Master Qian?" In a luxurious mansion in Feng State City, a white-clothed youth recited a few lines and raised his head to look at the young man in front of him. "Regardless of whether he is or not, I have to meet this young Master Qian." Zhao Xiuwen, who had been writing, put down his brush and looked at the partridge sky that he had recopied onto the paper. He said, "It's not important whether he bought this poem or not. What's important is where he bought it from. I'm more interested in someone who can write such a poem. Don't you find it strange, Yinzhou? Becoming famous overnight is a little strange." Yang Yinzhou nodded and said, "The style of the poem is unique. It's unlike anyone I know. Although the theme is nothing more than sadness and resentment, feelings and nostalgia, it's tactful and delicate. It's also romantic and charming. It's fresh and handsome. I really can't think of anyone else in Feng Province, or even the Qi Kingdom who has such a standard." He looked at Zhao Xiuwen and said, "If you didn't deny it just now, I really would have thought that this was one of your hobbies." "I don't have the leisure to do that," Zhao Xiuwen said with a smile. "However, that young Master Qian is the son of the God of Wealth. It doesn't seem to be easy. The God of Wealth will probably give you face." Yang Yinzhou shook his head and then looked at him again. He said, "I heard from the third prince that that person seems to have come to the Qi Kingdom. Do you know?" "Who?" Zhao Xiuwen raised his head and asked in confusion. "Li Yi," Yang Yinzhou said, looking at him. Zhao Xiuwen was stunned and slowly stood up from the chair. "Are you sure you've found out everything?" On a street somewhere in Feng Province, the young man stopped and looked at a shop in front of him and asked again. The servant behind him immediately replied, "Young master, I've found out everything." The scholar came back from the Jing Kingdom with Miss Lin. It seems that they were in trouble. They have an injured wife with them. They live in the courtyard next to Fonglin Garden. The young man nodded and said, "Let's go." Li Yi walked out of the courtyard and saw Lin Yong at the gate of Fonglin Garden. He said casually, "Brother Lin, have you eaten? Do you want to come in and eat?" Growl. Hearing the word eat, Lin Yong's stomach growled. He looked up at Li Yi and shook his head. He said righteously, "No need, no need. I've eaten outside just now. Thank you for your kindness, Li brothers." Mississippi Lu suffered another blow. She probably wouldn't cook for a while. However, it seemed that she had left a big shadow in Lin Yong's heart. He had obviously only tasted one bite yesterday, and regarded that courtyard as a dragon's pool and a tiger's den. Back then, he had eaten all the food she made. In the end, he still went back and brought Lin Yong a serving of rice. After tasting it, the mountain-like man was moved to tears. Just as Li Yi was about to go back, he heard noises coming from the shop. Inside Fonglin Garden, the man surnamed Bai looked at Lin Wanru and said with a bitter smile, "Wanru, think about it again. 10,000 taels of silver is not a low price. My father likes Lioli the most. I really can't think of a good gift to give him for his birthday." Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I'm sorry. The flying swallow horse is the treasure of Fonglin Garden. It's not for sale." "I know it's a bit difficult." The man surnamed Bai looked troubled and said, "But I also want my father to be happy. Otherwise, I definitely wouldn't ask." "I'm really sorry. I can't make the decision alone." Lin Wanru still shook her head. Not long after, the man surnamed Bai walked out of the shop. After glancing at Li Yi, he shook his head and turned to leave. Li Yi thought about it and walked into the shop. He saw Lin Wanru standing in front of the Lioli ware. He walked over and looked at her. After hesitating for a moment, he said, "Miss Lin, if you can sell this Lioli ware, it's better to sell it as soon as possible." "Why?" Lin Wanru looked at him and asked with a frown. Li Yi pointed at the Lioli ware and said, "There are some foreign merchants who claim to be from Great Britain. They traveled over land and water to bring a large amount of Lioli ware here. This thing will soon be worthless. So it's better to sell it as soon as possible." "How do you know?" Lin Wanru looked at him and asked. "It's a coincidence. I saw them in the Jing kingdom before. It won't be long before they reach the Qi kingdom." Li Yi could only say so much. Any more would involve business secrets. It was not easy for the British merchants. They traveled thousands of miles, traveled over land and water, and lost a lot of people. It was not easy for them to come here. He had to give them a way out. Watching him leave, Lin Wanru's face showed a thoughtful expression. When she looked at the flying swallow again, her eyes changed a little. "Great Britain? A foreign merchant?" Lin Wanru's face showed a thoughtful expression. "I've never heard of this foreign country. Is it rich in Lioli ware?" Chongzhou and Fengzhou were neighbors. If one rode a fast horse, it would take a day's journey from Fengzhou to the border of the Qi kingdom. After crossing the river from Chongzhou, one would reach the territory of the Jing kingdom. In a shop in Fengzhou city, the shop assistant scratched his head in confusion and asked, "Where did you say you came from? I didn't hear you clearly. Say it again." At this time, there were a few men in ragged clothes with unkempt hair and dirty faces. The man in the front looked at him and said arrogantly, "Listen carefully. We come from the great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. We have a big business with you. Hurry up and ask your shopkeeper to come out." "What are you doing?" The shop assistant looked at them with disdain. He waved his hand and said impatiently, "A bunch of stinky beggars. You want to ask our shopkeeper to come out? Hurry up and get lost. If you don't, I'll let the dogs bite you." The man in the front turned around and gave another man a look. The man immediately opened a big box on the ground. In an instant, the whole shop was lit up. The shop assistant looked at the box with his mouth wide open. He was stunned. After a while, he shouted and ran to the back. "Shopkeeper, come out quickly." Chapter 678. Qian Duoduo had been distressed for the past 2 days. The poem Partridge in the Sky, and the phrase, "I'm afraid we'll meet in a dream," had spread his name throughout the entire Feng State City. Although his name was well known in Feng State City before this, the meaning was very different. Foppish, idiot, prodigal. This was what people thought of him before. Foppish, idiot, prodigal, poem seller. This was what people thought of him now. He needed to prove himself and prove that he didn't buy the poem. He wasn't an idiot. He just didn't want others to know about it. However, the brother who sold him the poem had disappeared. The other party appeared mysteriously and disappeared mysteriously. He hadn't appeared since that night. It was as if the other party had appeared to save him that day. He didn't know the brother's name or appearance. The only clue he had was that alley. Therefore, he asked his father to buy the restaurant across the alley the next day. At this time, he was sitting in the restaurant's lobby. From time to time, he would look outside. If he saw someone stopping at the alley, he would go out and ask them. However, it had been 2 days, and he still hadn't seen the person he was looking for. Sigh, he sighed as he walked out of the alley again, and returned to the restaurant. Li Yi leaned against the wall outside a shop. Occasionally, he would look inside and be cut by the gazes of the 2 women at the door. He looked up and saw that the sign of Ruri Workshop was very eye-catching. He couldn't help but feel a bit depressed. He didn't know which bastard had copied the style of his own underwear, but he had even copied the name of the shop. Not only did he plagiarize, but he also didn't want to let him in. Mississippi Lou was injured. If something happened to her inside, he wouldn't be able to help her in time. He had brought Mississippi Lou out to shop during the day to buy some clothes and daily necessities. She had been in the underwear shop for a quarter of an hour. It seemed like she wouldn't be able to come out anytime soon. Li Yi leaned against the wall in boredom. He looked at the people coming and going on the street. When his eyes swept across a certain alley, he was slightly stunned. Sigh, did she leave Feng State? Tian Duo walked out of the alley again and sighed. When he was about to enter the restaurant, he suddenly heard a voice coming from the alley behind him. Are you satisfied with the poem? Hearing the familiar voice, Tian Duo stopped in his tracks. He immediately turned around and said, Brother, you're here. The voice just now came from inside the alley. He quickly walked into the alley, and when he was halfway there, the voice sounded again. All right, just stop there. Tian Duo immediately stopped in his tracks and looked at the corner of the alley, where a corner of a shirt could be seen. Are you satisfied with the words? The voice rang out again. Yes, I'm very satisfied. Tian Duo nodded fiercely. He had never bought such a valuable thing in his life. Now that he recalled the expressions of those people that night, he felt so happy that he wanted to shout out loud. As long as you're satisfied, I'm leaving. When the voice rang out again, a copper coin flew out from the corner of the alley. Received a good review, returned 1 coin. Tian Duo caught the copper coin, and after being stunned for a moment, his expression changed. He quickly took a few steps forward, and then seemed to remember something. He stopped and anxiously said, Brother, please wait. A moment later, a voice came from the other side. Is there anything else? A smile appeared on Tian Duo's face as he said, I wonder if brother still has poems for sale? The voice paused and asked, How many songs do you want? 10 songs. Just like before, 10,000 taels of silver. According to your rules, buy 5 and get 1 free, buy 10 and get 3 free. That's a total of 13 songs. Are there any special requirements? Just like the previous song. Love between a man and a woman. Tian Duo nodded vigorously. Yes, that's it. The person on the other side did not speak immediately, as if he was thinking. After a while, the voice sounded again. Pay a deposit of 5,000 taels first, and the item you want will be delivered to you by tonight. Tian Duo took out a stack of banknotes from his pocket. After splitting them in half, he walked to the corner of the room and carefully handed them over. 5,000 taels. Aren't you afraid that I'll run away with the money? Li leaned against the wall and asked. I trust you, brother. The voice came from the other side. Besides, it's only 5,000 taels, but 5 days' worth of pocket money? Li waved his hand and said, Wait at the entrance of the alley before it gets dark. Thank you, brother. Tian Duo beamed with joy and asked again, May I know your name, brother? Then, as if he remembered something, he immediately said, I'm sorry, I broke the rules. Brother, please don't blame me. It's fine. The voice was very straightforward this time. Fine, I won't change my name or my surname. Just call me Li Han. Where did you go? When Li walked back, Mississippi Lu was standing in front of the underwear store, holding 2 exquisite bags in her hands as she looked at him and asked, Just walking around. Li took the bags from her hands and said, Let's go and take a look in front. Catch him quickly. As soon as he said that, an anxious voice came from behind. A figure ran past Li at lightning speed, followed by a middle-aged fat man who was panting heavily. When the fat man ran to Li Yi's side, he finally could not run anymore. With one hand on his waist, he shouted weakly, Catch the thief, catch the thief. It's you? Li looked at the middle-aged fat man and asked in surprise. The fat man only glanced at him, took a moment to catch his breath, and continued to run forward. Li shook his head. The jade pendant given to him by the old emperor had only been sold for 1,000 taels of silver to this fatty. To think that this fellow would end up like this. From the looks of it, the thief must have stolen something valuable from him. Let's go. The thief had already disappeared. Li looked at Mississippi Lu. There was still a ready-made clothing store in front. They would go there for a while before going home to cook. In front, the middle-aged fat man held his waist and said to a constable, The money bag has been stolen. There's also a piece. He paused for a moment. It's the money bag has been stolen. Chase. The constable looked at the direction he was pointing at, waved his hand, and immediately chased after the thief with the other constables behind him. In a dilapidated alley somewhere. Haha, today's harvest is not bad. A man waved to the 2 people beside him as if he was showing off. There's actually so much silver." After saying that, he spread out his other hand and said, "There's also a piece of broken jade. I don't know how much it's worth. Let's find a place to pawn it tomorrow." Not long after, the few people came out of the alley with satisfaction and bumped into a person who was walking towards them. "Damn, are you blind? It's you again." The man looked at the man who bumped into him and grabbed him by the collar, mocking, "Why didn't you ask me if I've heard of your Patian Empress today?" "Protector, it's him." The man pulled on the man's clothes and said loudly. As soon as he said that, more than 10 figures rushed out from a nearby house. The person in front was a man in blue. At this moment, he was looking at the few people with gloomy eyes. He waved his hand and said, "Arrest them." The yellow-clothed people behind him rushed forward. "Damn, there's actually an accomplice." The man's expression changed, and he kicked away the man who was grabbing his clothes. The 2 people beside him had already reacted and madly ran forward. "Chase," the man in blue ordered. Everyone immediately responded and chased in the direction that the 3 people had escaped in. "Damn, I'm dead tired." Not long after, the man and the 2 people stood on the street, bent over and panting heavily. At this point, those people finally didn't dare to chase them anymore. "Tired? If you're tired, then take a rest." A voice came from behind. The man suddenly turned around and saw that the constable had placed a knife on his neck. Immediately, other constables came over and locked the 3 people together. "Why don't you come with us?" The leading constable waved his hand, and a few constables carried the 3 dejected people towards the direction of the yamen. Chapter 679. You can decide what to do with this case. I'm going to sleep for a while. Somewhere in Fengzhou City, the county magistrate yawned and waved his hand to the bailiffs. He then leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He was getting old, and his body couldn't take it anymore. Yesterday, he had fought with his new concubine until dawn, but now he couldn't take it anymore. "Yes, Your Excellency." The bailiff cupped his hands and bowed. "Tell me, how many times have you done this?" He walked down and patted the man's face. The big man sighed and said, "I can't count." "You have hands and feet. You can do anything. Why do you have to steal and rob?" The bailiff looked at him and said, "Now that you're out, find some serious work. Don't let me see you in the county jail again." "Alas, life is hard." The big man sighed and said in a melancholy tone, "It's impossible to work. I'm not born for this. If I don't steal and rob, I'll starve to death." The bailiff slapped his head and waved his hand, saying, "Take him away. See if there's anything missing." Another bailiff pulled a bag of money from the big man's body and threw it to the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man opened the bag and looked inside. His face was gloomy. Finally, he gritted his teeth and said, "There's nothing missing." He couldn't tell anyone about the jade pendant that he had planned to trade in the black market. Although it would cost him nearly 10,000 taels of silver, it was a crime that could get him beheaded for hiding an item belonging to the royal family. He couldn't let the government know about it. Fortunately, the big man had already thrown away the jade pendant. Although he was distressed about the money, he didn't feel so bad when he thought that it was from a guy who didn't know how to pawn it for 1,000 taels of silver. What a pity! He had originally planned to pay him more if he came to redeem it in the future. However, most of the things that were pawned in the pawnshop were equivalent to being sold. The possibility of redeeming them was very small. If he was lucky, he could make a net profit of 10,000 taels of silver. Although his heart ached, taking a step back compared to his life, none of this seemed that important. The burly man was being escorted by 2 bailiffs. Just as he was about to leave, he seemed to have thought of something. He stopped and said, "That's right, there's also a jade pendant. Since it's not worth much money, you can take it back as well. That way, you won't be able to say that I hid it from you." The burly man cupped his waist and said, "It's here. Brother Constable, help me take it." Hearing this, the middle-aged man's expression changed greatly. He immediately said, "Nonsense, I only lost my purse. How can there be any jade pendant? You stole it from someone else. You must have remembered wrongly." The burly man was stunned for a moment. He looked at the middle-aged man and said, "Don't tell me you're confused." You lost your jade pendant and forgot about it. Or, you really want to postpone it and make me suffer a few more beatings. The middle-aged man forced himself to calm down and said, Nonsense. Why would I harm you? Do you think I don't know if I lost the jade pendant or not? The burly man turned to look at the bailiff and said, Brother Constable, this guy may have really forgotten that the jade pendant is on my waist. Help me take it. He should remember it when he sees it. The bailiff looked at the two of them and felt a little surprised. He felt something from the bulge on the burly man's waist. Crack. The sound of porcelain shattering and tables and chairs overturning came from behind. The county magistrate didn't even bother to pat the dust off his body. He got up from the ground and ran in the direction of the door. He looked at the burly man and pointed at the jade pendant. He asked in shock, This jade pendant, where did you get it? The burly man was stunned for a moment and looked at the middle-aged man in astonishment. At this moment, the purse in the middle-aged man's hand had fallen to the ground. His face was pale. Plop. His legs turned to jelly. He knelt on the ground and cried, Sir, please spare my life. Tell me the truth. The county magistrate said sternly. Not long after, the county magistrate hurriedly walked out of the county office. He got on the sedan chair and urged, Go to King Feng's mansion. King Feng's mansion was a very special existence in Feng province. The highest official in Feng province was the provincial governor, but in fact, it was King Feng's mansion that managed Feng province. This was a special case in the Qi kingdom. Although many princes had fiefs, most of them were remote territories. They only enjoyed rent and lived a good life, but they didn't have any real power. However, the third prince, Zhao Yi, was not one of them. Among the more than 10 princes in the Qi kingdom, he was the only one who had a fief as large as a prefecture and could personally manage the government affairs. He had the power to make some important decisions. The third prince, Zhao Yi, had come to the fief when he was young. It took him more than 10 years to turn a medium-sized prefecture into one of the richest places in the Qi kingdom. Not only did he have a high status in the hearts of the people in Feng province, but he also had a great influence in the neighboring prefectures. At this moment in King Feng's mansion, the prestigious third prince had just put down a letter. Down below, Yang Yanzhou frowned and asked, Your Highness, why has the first prince suddenly come to Feng prefecture? Why? Zhao Yi looked out of the window and said, The imperial censor is accompanying him. He said he's inspecting the prefectures on behalf of my father. He'll arrive in Feng province in a few days. Yang Yanzhou thought about it and said, The first prince won't leave the capital easily. He's not here with good intentions. Your Highness, you should be prepared. This brother of mine. Zhao Yi sighed. Her tone was rather helpless as she said, Is there still no news from Chong province? Yang Yanzhou nodded and said, Not yet. However, according to the news from the Jing kingdom, it seems that they haven't found him either. There are rumors that he might have met with misfortune. Zhao Yi shook his head and said, That won't happen. If such a person died because of this, then God must be blind. I believe that we'll meet again one day. Yang Yanzhou didn't say anything. Thinking of that name, some scenes emerged in his mind, and his expression became somewhat enlightened. After a long time, Lily was still as elegant as before. The two talked for a while, and then a servant outside the door reported, The county magistrate of Feng City requests to see you. Greetings, Your Highness. The county magistrate of Feng City hurriedly came in and bowed to Zhao Yi. County Magistrate Wu, you don't have to be so courteous. Sit down. Zhao Yi raised his hand and said, May I know why County Magistrate Wu suddenly came to visit? County Magistrate Wu respectfully presented a jade pendant with both hands and said, Your Highness, this jade pendant was accidentally obtained from several bandits today. Yang Yanzhou was surprised. He looked at Zhao Yi and said, Your Highness, isn't this the one that His Majesty rewarded you? It's the Huilong pendant. Zhao Yi took the jade pendant from County Magistrate Wu's hands and smiled. He's here. Coming. Li Yi hurriedly walked into the kitchen. If he was a step late, he would have to make do with egg fried rice today. Mississippi Lu seemed to have made up her mind this time. She wouldn't stop until she made a dish that could be swallowed. She just felt pity for the ingredients that she had just thrown away as garbage. Some of them were really expensive. Thinking of the 5,000 taels of silver he had just received, he didn't feel so distressed. Out of the 10,000 taels of silver, he had to keep 1,000 taels of silver. When he left, he would redeem the jade pendant. If the old emperor remembered it one day, he couldn't use the excuse that the proud Lolita had lost it every time to fool him. Thinking of the jade pendant, he thought of the stingy pawnshop manager. The value of that jade pendant was certainly more than 1,000 taels of silver. But last time he was in urgent need of money, so he was forced to cheat him. He had always cheated people, and those who cheated him would sooner or later suffer retribution. This was not the second time they met, and he had already lost something important. The next time they met, he would probably lose his head. Therefore, it was better to be upright. The heavens were watching, and it was not easy for him to hold on to the integrity of his heart. When the smell of burning came from the kitchen of the small courtyard again, in the prison of the county government, the pawnshop manager knelt on the ground and kept kowtowing. He said in a trembling voice, He was wearing a bamboo hat that day. I really didn't know his identity. Chapter 680. In the county jail, Zhao Yi, the third prince of the Qi kingdom, looked at the pawnbroker and asked, "Half a month ago, he wore a bamboo hat and pawned this jade pendant for 1,000 taels of silver." "Yes, he used a bamboo hat to cover his face, so I didn't see what he looked like, nor did I know who he was." The pawnbroker said in a trembling voice, "Everything I said is true. If there is any falsehood, may I be struck by lightning." Not long after, Zhao Yi came out of the cell, shook his head and said, "This dragon pendant was given to me by my father. It is worth 10,000 taels of gold, but I pawned it for 1,000 taels of silver. Brotherly, you look down on me too much." Yang Yanzhou stood beside him, thought for a moment and said, "Your Highness, if that's the case, he should be in Fengzhou City now." Zhao Yi nodded and said, "He must know the value of this jade pendant, but he pawned it for only 1,000 taels of silver. He must be extremely short of money. He can't go back to the Jing kingdom for the time being, so it's normal for him to hide in the Qi kingdom. He shouldn't have left at this time." "Your Highness, who are you looking for? Do you want me to send someone?" County Magistrate Wu hesitated for a moment and said. Zhao Yi waved his hand and said, "No need, you don't need to ask about this matter. Remember to let the pawnbroker go later." County Magistrate Wu was stunned and said, "Your Highness, it's a big crime to hide a royal item. Are you going to let him go like this?" Zhao Yi smiled and said, "It doesn't matter, just do as I said." County Magistrate Wu looked up at him and finally nodded and said, "Your Highness, I understand." As they walked out of the county office, Yang Yanzhou turned around and asked, "Your Highness, what if he doesn't redeem the jade pendant?" Zhao Yi looked at the endless stream of people on the street and said, "It's good that he went to redeem it, but it's expected that he didn't. Send more people to investigate in secret these days. Feng State City is not big, so if he is still in the city, we will find him sooner or later." Yang Yanzhou nodded, and the two of them walked down the stairs. At the same time, in a courtyard a few streets away, Li Yi scratched his head in confusion. Although he had never paid much attention to the gifts bestowed by the old emperor, he still had some impression of them. Until now, he still couldn't remember when the old emperor had given him that jade pendant. After a while, he still had no clue. He shook his head and stopped thinking about these things. He had to quickly write out the 13 poems, and then go out to buy groceries. All the vegetables at home had been ruined by Mississippi Lu. He had to buy some new ones and send the poem to her to get the remaining 5,000 taels of silver. After this, he would never sell his poems for money again. Not only Su Shi, Li Bai and Qin Guan, but also Lu Yong and Yan Jidao. Every time they wrote a sentence, Li Yi could feel the strong resentment from a different time and space. "It's a disgrace. It's really a disgrace." It was not dark yet. Qian Duoduo stood at the entrance of the alley, waiting patiently. Only when night fell and his feet were about to go numb from standing, did a voice finally come from the alley. Money in one hand, goods in another. "Did you bring the silver?" Qian Duoduo was shocked and immediately said, "Yes." Something flew out of the darkness. Qian Duoduo reached out and caught it. He heard the voice say, "Here are 5 poems. You can check them first." Qian Duoduo walked to the side and opened it with the light of the lamp. There were a few words that he didn't know, but it should be the real thing. He walked back and handed a stack of banknotes in and said, "This is the remaining 5,000 taels of silver. Brother, please count it." As soon as he finished speaking, he felt that his hand was empty. After a while, another roll of paper flew out. "Money and goods are settled. Goodbye." Hearing the voice coming from the alley, Qian Duoduo hurriedly said, "Brother, please wait." The voice said, "Is there anything else?" Qian Duoduo scratched his head and said, "Cash back." "Do you want a copper coin?" "Even a copper coin is money." Qian Duoduo smiled embarrassedly and said, "My father taught me since I was a child that every porridge and meal is hard-earned. I shouldn't spend money recklessly and should be thrifty. Even a copper coin is money. I deserve it. Why don't I want it?" This time, the voice was silent for a long time before it spoke again. "Sorry, there is no cash back this time. I used up my change when I bought vegetables just now." Buying vegetables? Qian Duoduo was stunned and looked ahead in surprise. However, there was no more sound coming from the darkness. "Brother, remember that you still owe me a copper coin," Qian Duoduo shouted to himself. He carefully put away the poems and strode back. As Li Yi walked on the street, he thought that he should have spared him a celery or something. He didn't like to owe people money. Even a copper coin was still a debt. For someone with obsessive-compulsive disorder, there was not much difference between a copper coin and 10,000 taels of silver. When he passed by a city gate, he saw the soldiers at the gate questioning passers-by in the dark. They seemed to be holding something like a portrait in their hands. They were probably chasing after some felons. It seemed that the public security in Fengzhou was not very good. It was better to be careful while walking alone on the street at night. The right thing to do was to go back and sleep with Mississippi Lu. In a restaurant, several dancers were dancing gracefully on a high stage. One of them had a slim figure and graceful movements, which attracted the attention of most people in the hall. A young man raised the wine glass in his hand and looked at Qian Duoduo as he said, "Brother Qian, Miss Shershur thanked you in front of everyone that day. It's a pity that you left early. Otherwise, something wonderful would have happened between you and Miss Shershur that day. Don't you plan to seize the opportunity today?" Qian Duoduo waved his hand and said, "I just saw Miss Shershur that day and couldn't help but compose a poem. There is no other meaning. Brother Qian is very talented. Your reputation has spread throughout Fengzhou. I admire you." A person cupped his hands and said, "We have known each other for more than 10 years, but I didn't know that Brother Qian had such a talent for poetry. Brother Qian, you have hidden it well." The people around him were all friends that he had known for a long time. They were not like those pedantic scholars who only knew how to mock him. Qian Duoduo smiled and said, "Don't be arrogant, don't be arrogant. I am very low-key." One of them revealed an indignant expression and said, "There are actually people who say that Brother Qian's poems were bought." Even Zhao Xiuwen acknowledged Brother Qian's works and admitted that it would be difficult for him to surpass them. In the state of Qi, is there anyone who is more talented than him? Could it be that Brother Qian bought a poem from Zhao Xiuwen? Yes, such a poem is probably a priceless treasure. How could it be bought with money? Another person agreed. Qian Duoduo shook his head and said in a low voice, "There is no such thing as a priceless treasure in this world. If 100 taels of silver isn't enough, 1,000 taels of silver is enough. If 1,000 taels of silver isn't enough, 1,000 taels of silver is enough. There has to be a price that matches it. I think that poem is only worth 1,000 taels of silver." Someone asked doubtfully, "Those poor people value their moral integrity more than their lives. Can this kind of poem be bought with money?" Qian Duoduo smiled and said, "There is nothing in this world that cannot be bought with money. If there is, it means that you did not pay enough." Someone asked in surprise, "Brother Qian, do you mean that you bought that poem?" "Of course not." Qian Duoduo shook his head and said, "I can easily write a dozen of those poems. Do I need to buy it?" Chapter 681. Cough, Brother Qian is talented. I admire you, admire you. The moment Qian Duoduo said this, the young men beside him were stunned for a moment before they immediately said with a smile. Almost all of their families were businessmen. Although they had been forced to study since they were young, it was difficult for them to even memorize books. They knew nothing about poems and essays. Because of this, they were looked down upon by those scholars. They naturally did not have a good impression of those people. They were happy to see Qian Duoduo write good poems and slap those people in the face. Of course, it was also because the Qian family was rich. Many of their families could only survive by relying on the Qian family. They had to fawn on the Qian family's young masters. My father often taught me to be low-key. I have talent. Will I tell you? Will I be like those poor bastards who spread it everywhere? I won't. Qian Duoduo stretched out his hand and pressed it down. He said, "It's fine if you know about these things. Don't spread it around. I don't like to be ostentatious." I don't know where he bought a poem from, but he's getting cocky. A cold snort came from the side. A green-robed scholar glanced over and said, "He really thinks he's a scholar. It's fine if he's trash who doesn't know anything about literature, but to take someone else's poem as his own, he's simply shameless." Who are you talking about? Who are you talking about? Before Qian Duoduo could speak, a person beside him stood up and turned around to look at him in dissatisfaction. The green-robed scholar smiled mockingly. He turned his head and said, "Who doesn't know shame? Who knows in their hearts? Don't you think so? If his heart is magnanimous, why would he be afraid of the words of others? I'm afraid some people have ulterior motives. Only he knows if there are any ulterior motives." There were a few other similarly dressed men beside the green-robed scholar. At this moment they all spoke, their tone full of mockery. Qian Duoduo stood up and walked over. He looked at the person from before and asked, "If his heart is magnanimous, he won't be afraid of the words of others?" The scholar nodded and said, "Of course." Qian Duoduo asked again, "Then are you magnanimous?" The man sneered and said, "We scholars have righteousness in our hearts. We do things in an upright manner. We are naturally magnanimous. You aren't afraid of the words of others?" "Not. Really impotent." "No." As soon as the scholar opened his mouth, he realized that something was wrong. He swallowed the next word and looked at him coldly. "How could I fall for such a clumsy trick?" he said. "Since you don't care what others say." Qian Duoduo looked at him and said, "If I call you a son of a bitch, won't you be angry?" The scholar was startled. His face quickly turned from red to green. Pointing at him, he said, brat, you dare." Qian Duoduo looked at him and said, "Look, you don't even know how to scold people. Who is the trash? You dare to say that you are not a wastrel who spent money to buy poems?" The scholar's eyes were almost spitting fire as he said, "If you can compose another poem of that level on the spot, I, Wan Jun, will immediately kowtow to you and apologize for what I said before." "Brother Wan." The expressions of the few scholars behind him changed as they hurriedly stepped forward and said worriedly, "Brother Wan, be careful with your words." If Qian Duoduo bought 2 poems instead of 1, Wan Jun would lose all his face from now on. He would never be able to raise his head in Feng State City again. "You don't need to say anything more." Wan Jun waved his hand and said, "If he can buy 2 poems of that level, I will admit defeat this time. If he can't, I will expose this shameless wastrel to the public." "Are you sure?" Qian Duoduo looked at him and said, "If I can compose another poem, will you kowtow to me?" A scholar added, "It is to compose another excellent poem that everyone will agree with. If you make up a few lines, will Brother Wan still kowtow to you?" The commotion here had already attracted the attention of the people in the hall. Even the woman on the stage temporarily stopped her performance and looked over with a surprised and doubtful expression. "If that's the case, then let's bet." Qian Duoduo nodded as he looked at the stage and said, "I remember the first time I met Miss Feifei. The plumage dance is still fresh in my memory. I will give this poem to Miss Feifei." Give it to me?" The woman on the stage was startled and couldn't come back to her senses for a while. Below the stage, there was already a voice coming out. "After a dream, the tower is locked high, and the curtains are lowered when I sober up. Last year's spring hate comes. Falling flowers stand alone, and swallows fly together in the rain. I remember the first time I met Fei, wearing a robe with two hearts. The lute string speaks of yearning. The bright moon shines on the robe, and the rosy clouds return. The woman on the stage called Fei was still wondering when she had worn a robe with two hearts. As for the lute, she didn't remember playing it often. She was good at the zither. Below the stage, the young man called Wanjun was stunned on the spot. The expressions of the people behind him changed almost at the same time. They didn't expect Qian Duoduo to so easily throw out such a poem. The people around them were already whispering the lyrics, secretly comparing it to the previous song. They were both about singing girls, and the style was similar. The lyrics were similar. A person's style was usually fixed. At the same time, it was very difficult to change it. It was very easy for outsiders to tell if the two poems were written by the same person. Originally, they were almost certain that the Partridge Sky was bought by Qian Duoduo. However, at this moment, their hearts were a little shaken. After all, there were no scholars who had reached this level of talent who would be willing to sell their hard work. In reality, when one's literary talent reached this level, they would not lack money. One poem was already a little unbelievable, let alone two? Qian Duoduo turned to look at Wanjun and said, "How is it? This poem is not bad, right? What did Brother Wan say just now?" Wanjun's expression changed. He couldn't tell which of the two poems was better. Because of personal preferences and other factors, no one could tell. Because of this, it meant that if Qian Duoduo made another poem that was similar to the previous one, he would have to kowtow to him and apologize at this moment. Someone behind Wanjun suddenly said, "You bought one, and you might have bought two. Unless you take out another one, you still can't prove that these two poems were written by you. I knew you would be shameless." Qian Duoduo shook his head and said, "Then how about you listen to this one?" After saying this, he opened his mouth again and said, "Red leaves, yellow flowers, autumn is late, 1,000 miles miss the traveler. Flying clouds end, returning to the swan with no letter. Where can I send a letter? Tears fall unceasingly by the window, like an inkstone turning to grind ink. Gradually writing about parting, deep in this love, the red paper is colorless." Wanjun opened his mouth and his face was ashen. This time he didn't say anything. The scholars behind him also had faces full of disbelief. How long had it been? Did he really think composing poems was like eating and drinking? The way the surrounding people looked at Qian Duoduo had already changed. He might have bought one or two poems, but he couldn't possibly tie up a talented scholar to write poems for him, right? Anyone who was involved in poetry could easily see that these three poems were obviously written by the same person. Such a talented scholar should have been famous throughout Feng province. How could he work for someone else's disciple? Could it be that this young master Qian, who had always been known as an idiot, had been hiding it all along? Astonished expressions appeared on more and more people's faces. Li Yi was also astonished. Other than astonishment, he was also gratified. This was because when he came back, he found that Mississippi Lu had actually washed all the dishes. In the past 2 years, this was the first time he saw her do such a thing. After putting away the groceries and the money, he chatted with Mississippi Lu for a while before going to bed. Among the 13 poems just now, more than 8 of them were written by Yan Jidao. Before going to bed, Li Yi put his palms together and recited in his heart, "I'm forced to make a living. Brother Yan, don't blame me. Don't blame me." Chapter 682. Wanjun's face was pale. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. The scholars behind him also lowered their heads and didn't say a word. Everyone, including the woman on the stage, looked at Qian Duoduo with unprecedented changes in their eyes. "Brother Wan, how is this poem? It's not bad, right?" Qian Duoduo looked at Wanjun and said, "I don't know why, but my thoughts are flowing like a spring today. Just now, I came across another poem. Brother Wan, do you want to help me appreciate it? You don't push me too far." Wanjun raised his head and widened his eyes, which were full of anger. Qian Duoduo looked at him and narrowed his eyes, saying, Brother Wan, have you forgotten what you just said? I was wrong. Wan Jun's expression changed. He said in a low voice and turned around saying, let's go. Seeing that they were about to leave, one of the people behind Qian Duoduo wanted to stop them but was stopped by him. Qian Duoduo waved his hand and said, forget about kowtowing. I don't want to have such an unfilial son. Many people looked at the backs of Wan Jun and the others as they left with complicated expressions. If Wan Jun really kowtowed and admitted his mistake tonight, he would lose all his face. After tomorrow, he would definitely become the laughingstock of Feng State City. Although he temporarily saved his face by leaving like this, it was inevitable that he would end up going back on his word. If Qian Duoduo was just an idiot, and the poem was really bought, it would be fine. But he threw out 2 more poems just like that, and shut everyone's mouth. With that kind of talent, how could he sell his poems to others for money? Unless he really kidnapped Zhao Xiuwen and forced him to write poems for him. Otherwise, he had always been low-key and never revealed anything. However, if it was the latter, what was the reason? One person looked at Qian Duoduo with eyes full of admiration and said, hey brother Qian, you just said that you have a new poem. Read it for us. Read what? Loki. Qian Duoduo waved his hand and said, we'll talk about it next time. Just now he had desperately memorized 2 poems. When he read the first one, he almost read out the 2 words Xiaoping. If he hadn't remembered that there was an annotation below the sentence, where the word Xiaoping could be written with any woman's name, he would have almost made a fool of himself. He even marked out such details. That brother was really meticulous to the extreme. He could simply be called a businessman with a conscience. Let's go. Eating and drinking were not his goals. He had already done what he needed to do. Seeing those poor scholars suffer made him feel carefree. Qian Duoduo waved his hand and walked out of the door. Young Master Qian, please wait. Qian Duoduo turned his head in confusion and saw the woman named Feifei coming down. She smiled and said to him, I wonder if Feifei has the honor to invite Mr. Qian upstairs for a chat? Qian Duoduo was stunned and said, yes. Seeing the 2 of them walking up while talking and laughing, the people behind Qian Duoduo stood there in a daze. Brother Qian, you guys go back first. I want to talk about poetry with Miss Feifei. Qian Duoduo didn't look back. He waved his hand and said, it's good to know how to write poems. Seeing the 2 of them enter a certain room, someone sighed and said with a sigh, before today, Qian Duoduo was still the same as them, relying on throwing money to attract the attention of these women. After today, he had completely left their ranks. Just like today, they could only sigh as they watched him and Miss Feifei's back. Very quickly, the woman on the stage changed to another person. However, she did not receive much attention from the crowd. It was unknown how many people were looking at the tightly shut door upstairs with complicated feelings. Li pushed open the door and stretched comfortably. He let out a long breath of foul air, and could not help but feel refreshed. The medicinal herbs must have really worked. These days, Mississippi Lu's body was recovering very quickly. Apart from being unable to use her vital qi, she was no different from a normal person in other aspects. At this rate, it would not be long before this trip to the Qi Kingdom came to a successful end. He had asked Lin Wanru before. The Lin family's caravan had no plans to go to the Jing Kingdom in the near future. Being in a foreign country, he could not find anyone he could trust to send a message. Thinking about it, the news that Rui and the others had received should only be the last time he and Mississippi Lu appeared in Shuzhou. The possibility of them finding this place was very small. He could not leave the injured Mississippi Lu here alone. There was no one he could use, so he could only put this matter aside for the time being. Li brothers, Miss wants to see you. Lin Yang's figure appeared at the door. Li Yi waved his hand and said, got it. I'll go right away. These days he had been meeting with Miss Lin almost every day. After learning how to use the debit and credit method, she took out all the previous accounts and calculated them one by one. Sometimes, when she encountered a problem, she would ask him for help. When walking into Fonglin Garden, Li Yi's eyes inadvertently glanced around. A hint of surprise appeared on his face. He looked at Lin Yong and asked, what about the horse stepping on swallows? It was sold. Hearing this, Lin Yong said somewhat gloomily, "Who sold it?" Li looked at him and asked. Of course it was Mississippi. Lin Yong sighed and said, although it was sold for a total of 13,000 taels, which is a profit of 5,000 taels, I just don't like that by guy. If it wasn't for him pestering us all day, Miss would definitely not have sold it. These days, business has not been as good as before. Believe in your Mississippi. It's good to sell it. Li patted him on the shoulder and walked to a room in the backyard of the shop. That by guy really loved this Miss Lin. He fought to prevent losses for the Lin family. He was the most suitable spare tire. He knocked on the door and a gentle voice came from inside. Is it Li? Come in. Lin Wanru was sitting at the table and writing something seriously. Li walked over and shook his head after glancing at it. That guy surnamed Qian was really addicted to showing off. In just a few days he had written 13 poems. It was extremely ostentatious. Did he really want to be the poet sage of the Qi kingdom? Seeing him shake his head, Lin Wanru put down the pen and said with a smile, "It's not good. I'm sorry." Li shook his head and said, "It's a lot better than before. I still have to thank you for your guidance." Lin Wanru stood up and said. She was very clear that her calligraphy could make such great progress in such a short period of time. It was all because of his advice from time to time. The more she interacted with him, the more she found that this scholar who was picked up had many unexpected things. First was his amazing calligraphy. Second was his culinary skills. He seemed to know some martial arts too. Even some of the views on business that he revealed in a few words were also a great inspiration to her. This always made her suspicious. Could it be that every scholar in Jingguo was like this? Li Yi's gaze moved away from the poem she had copied and asked, "Is there something wrong with the accounts again?" Lin Wanru shook her head and said, "I actually invited you here because I have a presumptuous request." The concept of presumptuous request was too broad. Some things could be agreed to and some could not be agreed to. After all, Mississippi Lu was still here, so he still had to pay attention to some things. "What is it?" Li looked at her and asked. He had to clarify whether he could agree to it or not. "There's an important meeting tomorrow night. Several big trading companies in Feng State will be participating. Brother Lin is straightforward, so it's not suitable for him to participate. I don't know if you have time. I think. That's it?" "That's it." Li nodded with some disappointment. "If it's tomorrow night, I should have time." Chapter 683. The meeting that Lin Wanru mentioned was actually a gathering of some rich businessmen in Fengzhou City. It was said that it would be held every once in a while. After all, doing business was not the business of one or two families. Even top businessmen like the Qian family had to cooperate with others, let alone the Lin family, who could not avoid these necessary social interactions. As the guard of the Lin family, Lin Yong was also Lin Wanru's bodyguard most of the time. He would follow her on some important occasions. In the previous meeting, because a certain wealthy merchant said some inappropriate words to Lin Wanru, he was violently beaten up by the furious Lin Yong on the spot. Later on, the Lin family paid a price to settle the matter with great difficulty. Although there weren't any serious consequences, from then on, Lin Wanru didn't dare to bring him to similar occasions anymore. Lin Wanru had just briefly mentioned these things to him. Compared with Lin Yong, who was a hothead, he looked gentle and modest. He knew how to do business. Most importantly, he was handsome and could be taken out to meet people. He was the best choice to take his family on a trip to a banquet. The reason why he agreed to take her along was that they had become familiar with each other these days. It was not a good idea to refuse such a small matter. Secondly, it was boring to go to bed early every night. It was good to go out occasionally to change the mood. The place they were going to tomorrow was a small manor of the Qian family in the city. Every banquet was held by several top businessmen in turn. Small families like the Lin family were only qualified to participate. The host of this banquet was the Qian family. Recently, the Qian family was very famous in Fengzhou City. Before this, the Qian family was well known because they were rich. Recently, they became famous because they had an evildoer. This evildoer was called Qian Duoduo. More than a dozen shocking poems were thrown out, which made him completely popular in Fengzhou City. Everyone knew that Zhao Xiuwen was the sage of poetry of the Qi Kingdom. He was a role model for scholars, and he was the top scholar in the 5th year of Xinghe. Now he was assisting the 3rd prince in Feng province. Everyone knew about his talent. However, in recent days, Qian Duoduo's name had almost overshadowed Zhao Xiuwen's reputation in Feng Prefecture City. After being ridiculed for more than 10 years, he had also been labeled as an idiot for more than 10 years. After enduring patiently for more than 10 years, he suddenly shocked everyone and completely subverted everyone's understanding of him. There were many people who had doubts about this, but there were also some people who believed that the Qian family had really produced a Qilin son this time. Xiuwen, what do you think? Yang Yanzhou asked Zhao Xiuwen after flipping through a book of poems. Great literary talent. Zhao Xiuwen also held a similar booklet in his hand. He nodded his head and said, 13 poems, each of which is an excellent work. Yang Yanzhou shook his head and asked, do you really believe that these poems were written by Qian Duoduo in 5 days? For a poem of this level, even I would have to spend a long time to craft it. It's not like you, and I don't know what the son of the god of wealth is like. Zhao Xiuwen put down the book of poems and said, there must be an expert behind him, but I still can't figure it out. From his poems, I can see that he must be a proud person. Why would he give away his painstaking efforts? Could it really be just for money? Yang Yanzhou asked doubtfully. The important thing is, when did such a talent appear in Feng province? Zhao Xiuwen smiled and said, I might have to go to the Qian family in a few days. Speaking of which, he is also in Feng province. Yang Yanzhou thought about it and said, could it be him? Zhao Xiuwen raised his eyebrows and asked, if it was him, it would not be difficult for him to write these poems. But why would he give them to a stranger? It's not a gift. Yang Yanzhou looked at him and said, when he first arrived in Feng province, he pawned the 3rd prince's jade pendant. He must be in desperate need of money. With his style of doing things, it is not strange at all that he would do such a thing. Zhao Xiuwen frowned and asked, even if he was in need of money, he is a proud scholar. How could he? Xiuwen, you still don't know him very well. Yang Yanzhou smiled and said, years ago in Qing'an Prefecture he wrote the immortal on the Magpie Bridge, on the prayer lantern. It was picked up by someone and spread out. At the Mid-Autumn Poetry Meet, he used the Shui Diao Getu to win 200 taels of silver. At King Ning's mansion he used the phrase, writing new poems to express his worries, and made many scholars lose face. A dozen poems caused the reputation of the goddess of water to spread to the Qi kingdom. But what you don't know, Xiuwen, is that he casually gave those poems to a woman. Now that I think about it, when he was in need of money, it is not strange that he used these poems to exchange for money. Yang Yanzhou smiled bitterly and said, even though I don't want to admit it to him, poems seem to be something that he did casually. Which scholar doesn't view their proud works as treasures? But he didn't care at all. Just this point alone is something that I will not be able to do in my lifetime. If it really was him. Zhao Xiuwen looked out the window and said, I have to go to the Qian family today. In a gorgeous manner somewhere in Fengzhou City, a fat middle-aged man with a big belly walked out of the door. He looked at the 2 young men and said with a bit of surprise, what kind of wind is blowing today? How come you 2 are here? Zhao Xiuwen cupped his hands and said, I took the liberty to come here. Money God, please don't be offended. The fat middle-aged man waved his hand and said, don't be offended. Please come in quickly. Perhaps not many people knew the name of this middle-aged fatty, but if one mentioned his nickname, almost everyone in Feng State City would know about it. Money God, the master of the Qian family, started from scratch. In just a short period of more than 10 years, he had accumulated countless family wealth. People only knew that the Qian family was very rich, but they didn't know how much money they had. Therefore, they simply called him Money God, which showed the wealth of the Qian family. In a spacious hall in the manor, the 3 of them sat as guests and hosts. Money God took a sip of tea and looked at the 2 people and asked, did the 3rd prince make any arrangements for you 2 to come here this time? Yang Yanzhou shook his head and said, The third prince did not make any arrangements. What are you doing here if he didn't make any arrangements? Money God was startled. He stood up and said, I am very busy here. In the time it takes to drink a cup of tea with you, a few hundred taels of silver are gone. Zhao Xiuwen stood up and said, Money God, if you have something to do, go do it. This time we are here to find your son. Money God's face showed vigilance and he asked, Why are you looking for Duo? Did he get into trouble outside again? It's not that he got into trouble. Zhao Xiuwen looked at him and said, There is something that I want young Master Qian to clarify. Money God's face became more vigilant and he said, You two are good enough to be my Master Duoduo's teachers. What kind of thing can you need my Master Duoduo to clarify? Zhao Xiuwen's face showed helplessness. He turned his head and looked at Yang Yanzhou and said, Yanzhou, you tell him. There are 10,000 taels of silver here, enough to buy 13 songs. Next time you can't be so impulsive. Release one song every 3 days. Well, that's it. In a room, a slightly fat young man pressed a stack of silver notes under his pillow and whispered, I have to save money for a while. I can't let father know. Young master, young master. A servant's voice came from outside the door. Qian Duo put down the quilt, walked over, opened the door and asked, What's the matter? The servant immediately said, Young master, the master wants you to go over. Qian Duo frowned and asked, Isn't my father busy at night now? What does he want me to do? The servant replied, I don't know. There were 2 guests at home just now, so the master came over and asked me to call you over. Qian Duo waved his hand and said, Lead the way. He was thinking about how to see his brother again. Under the guidance of the servant, he soon came to a hall. He raised his head and looked at the middle-aged man sitting in the chair and asked, Father, why are you looking for me? Qian Duo looked at him with a black face and asked, Tell me, what have you done in the past few days? Tell me honestly. No. Qian Duo was stunned for a moment and said, I've been fine these days. I haven't caused any trouble. Bastard, you still don't admit it. Qian Duo stood up from the chair, pointed at his nose and scolded, I haven't paid attention to you for a few days. You've grown up. Instead of learning how to do business with me, you actually went to write poems. Why did you write such useless things? Don't tell me that you want to be the top scorer. Instead of doing proper things, you have to go to these crooked ways. Even if you become the top scorer, what can you do? You're still a good for nothing. On the side, Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen looked at each other and took a deep breath at the same time. The 2 extremely self-restrained top scorers finally calmed down a little. Chapter 684. Dad, I know I was wrong. Qian Duo lowered his head and said sincerely. When it came to this kind of topic, he never argued with his father. Otherwise, it would cause even more serious consequences. You have to remember that you will inherit the Qian family in the future. Don't go down the wrong path. Qian Duo nodded with satisfaction. Then he turned his head and looked at Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen. He said, Okay, Tu Zhuangyuan, if you have anything to say, you can ask now. When he called them Zhuangyuan, Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen didn't have any special feelings in their hearts. At this moment, when he mentioned it again, they felt an inexplicable irony. Suppressing this strange thought, Yang Yanzhou looked at Qian Duo and said, I just want to ask young Master Qian, the 14 poems that have been circulating recently, were they written by you? As his voice fell, Zhao Xiuwen also looked over. What do you mean? Qian Duo frowned and said, My poems, of course, were written by me. This is not a business. Can I buy them from others? Zhao Xiuwen glanced at him and said, This is a matter of great importance. I hope young Master Qian can answer truthfully. Qian Duo curled his lips and said, What do you mean truthfully? This was originally written by me. Zhao Xiuwen cupped his hands and said, Since young Master Qian can write such excellent works, you must have a lot of works in your daily life. Brother Yang and I are also people who love poetry. Young Master Qian, why don't you take it out and let us appreciate your literary talent? Damn, I was careless. Qian Duo cursed in his heart. At that time, he should have spent another 10,000 taels of silver to buy 100 poems that were worth 100 taels of silver. If he was unhappy, he could have spent one, and if he was happy, he could have spent two. Then he wouldn't have encountered this embarrassing situation. Ahem. He covered his mouth and coughed dryly. He said, "Writing poetry relies on inspiration. To be honest, I haven't written before." Suddenly, one day, when I woke up, there was a strange feeling in my mind. I felt like my thoughts were flowing and my writing was spirited. Qian Duo sighed and said, "This feeling will appear every few days. I don't know when it will appear again." Zhao Xiuwen and Yang Yanzhou were stunned for a moment. Although some masterpieces relied on a momentary flash of inspiration, the prerequisite was that one had to accumulate enough experience to support such momentary inspiration. He was originally an idiot, and suddenly wrote so many terrifying poems. That flash of inspiration had to be flashing from morning to night. Zhao Xiuwen looked back at Fortune God of Money and asked, "Fortune God of Money?" Money God of Fortune waved his hand and said, "Whether you believe it or not, I believe it." Yang Yanzhou suddenly turned his head to look at him and said, "This matter is related to an important matter for His Highness. We must know who wrote this poem." "Really?" Fortune God of Money's face froze. "Of course," Yang Yanzhou said. Money God of Fortune nodded, turned to Qian Duo, and asked, "Tell me who bought those poems from?" Seeing the God of Fortune's serious face, Qian Duo showed a hint of hesitation on his face. How much did it cost?" Qian Duo looked up again and said helplessly, 10,000 taels. 10,000 taels and you bought a few lousy poems. Money God of Money's eyes widened. "You prodigal son of AB*T. Money God of Money, many of those poems are enough to be passed down through the ages. They are worth far more than 10,000 taels. Zhao Xiuwen finally couldn't help but speak. Money God of Money waved his hand and said, "I don't care if it's passed down or not. Throwing out 10,000 taels of silver without making a sound is not the style of my Qian family." Then he looked at Qian Duo and said angrily, "Tell me honestly, who sold these poems to you?" Qian Duo sighed and said helplessly, I don't know. You said you didn't even see the person's face, let alone know who he is. You just gave him 10,000 taels of silver. Aren't you afraid that he will cheat you?" Money God of Money rubbed his eyebrows and asked again. Qian Duo said, "But it turns out that the brother did not cheat me." B****, you're still in the right. Money God of Money was so angry that the fat on his face trembled a few times. At this time, an old servant walked in from outside the door and said, "Master, the Zhou family and the Huang family are here. I'll deal with you when I'm done tonight." The Zhou family and the Huang family both had major cooperation with the Qian family. Their families' financial resources were similar to the Qian families, so they could not be neglected. Money God of Money glared at Qian Duo and said to Yang Yanzhou and Zhao Xiuwen, "I have important guests to entertain now. You guys sit here for a while." Zhao Xiuwen nodded and said, "Money God of Money, go ahead. We still have some details to ask young Master Qian." Seeing Money God of Money leave, Qian Duo obviously relaxed. He sat on the chair next to him, shrugged at the two of them and said, "I just told you everything I know. There's nothing more. I don't know how to contact him. It's useless to ask me." A trace of doubt appeared on Zhao Xiuwen's face. He asked, "You just said that the person who sold you the poems was called Li Han?" Qian Duo took a sip of tea, nodded, and said, "Yes, he said that he would not change his name or his surname. It should not be false. Prince Jean Li Han." Yang Yanzhou nodded and said, "It should not be false." A trace of joy appeared on Zhao Xiuwen's face. He looked at Qian Duo and said, "Describe the situation again." Qian Duo's face showed an impatient expression. He waved his hand and said, "How many times have I said that I really don't know where he is? I have already told you what I should tell you. You can go and find him. Why are you staying at my house?" Li once heard people say that among the many mansions in Fengzhou City, the one with a silver lion at the door was the Qian family. At that time, he thought that it was not symmetrical. He imagined the image of a silver lion squatting in front of the Qian family's door. He felt awkward for a while. When he arrived at the Qian family, he found that there was not one lion, but two. If he had known that there would be such a thing, he would not have sold his poems. With this lion, he could have anything he wanted. He looked back at Lin Wanru and asked, "Is this lion really made of pure silver?" Everyone in Fengzhou City knows about the Qian family's silver lion. Lin Wanru nodded and said, "Let's go in." The Qian family was indeed the Qian family. Even the gate was higher than the two next to it. There were a lot of servants at the door to greet the guests. After handing over the invitation, they were welcomed in. Lin Wanru obviously had some connections in Fengzhou. Along the way, many people greeted them with a smile, especially some young men. Their tone and expressions were even more attentive. There were quite a number of young people here today, and they were not like what Li Yi had imagined. A group of middle-aged, balding successful people. Of course, there were also some people who came with their elders. In this kind of occasion, it was beneficial to accumulate more connections. "Wanru over here." A voice came from not far away. Li Yi turned his head and saw young master by walking over with a smile on his face. However, the smile on his face quickly disappeared. He looked at Li Yi and turned to look at Lin Wanru. He asked suspiciously, "Why is he here?" "Brother Bai." Lin Wanru nodded at him and said, "I invited Li to come with me." "Excuse me." She bowed slightly and turned back to smile at Li Yi. She said, "Let's go over there." The young man with the surname Bai stood in the same place and looked back. When he saw the two disappearing figures, his expression began to change. "Brother Bai, who was the person beside Miss Wanru just now? I don't think I've seen him before." A young man walked over from the side with a puzzled expression. Bai Yu smiled and said, "I don't know. I'm not familiar with him. He should be someone from the Lin family." The man smiled and patted his shoulder. "It's been so long, but you still haven't won Miss Lin's heart. Brother Bai, you have to work hard." Bai Yu smiled and didn't say anything. However, when the man turned around and left, a trace of darkness quickly appeared on his face. You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.